Welcome to our free UX course. This course is meant to help you kickstart your UX journey so you can learn the fundamentals. At this point, you may be asking yourself, why did you create this? Well, we did a ton of research on UX courses, mostly free and some paid, and what we found wasn't that impressive or that helpful. Which is why we decided to create this kick-ass free UX course. Here are 5 things that you're going to get from this course. First, there are over 20 lessons and hours of content that teach you the fundamentals. If you continue to apply these learnings and add a few other key skills to your tool belt, we're confident that you'll have what it takes to successfully kickstart your UX journey. Second, you learn UX by actually doing. This isn't a course where you just sit back and you do your best to absorb the information. Instead, you'll do research and start to build a real solution to a user and business problem for REI. If you're unfamiliar with REI, they're a camping company. You can check them out at rei.com. And no, by the way, this is not a promotion and we're not sponsored by them. By the end of the course, you'll have gone through the first 2 phases of the UX process, which are the most fundamental for getting started in UX. Third, we specifically designed a Figma workbook for this course to help guide you through the process. We've taken the guesswork out of it. By following these steps, you'll move through the phases of the UX process with confidence. The fourth thing is really special. Within the Figma workbook, you can actually compare your work to ours. We added screens that show our answers, so when you're done with a particular exercise, you can make it visible and see how you did. Also, alongside our Figma workbook, you can get additional course material like the course slides and a lo-fi wireframing kit. Get those resources at kickassux.com under the free UX course page. The final thing, you don't have to take notes. Below each video, we added a main points and takeaway section. Plus, if you download the course material, you'll have all the slides too. Because it took a few months for us to put this free course together, once you're done with the course, we deeply appreciate hearing how your experience was. Also, we'd be incredibly grateful if you'd be willing to give us a testimonial to let other designers know how it went. But before getting into the weeds, we just want to be 100% clear. We don't recommend you use the work from this course in your portfolio. There's 2 reasons for this. First, you won't have completed a full case study. And second, everyone who goes through this course will be working on the exact same problem and solution. If everyone uses this as a case study in their portfolios, it will be evident that it came from a course, which is not what you want. And this course is just the first step on your journey into UX. It's meant to help you start learning the UX process and begin practicing it for yourself. If you have your sights set higher and want to land a job in UX, there will be many more steps you have to take to get there. If a UX job is your destination, you'll have to produce at least 2 of your own unique case studies that prove you know how to follow the UX process and highlight your skill set. You can learn the necessary skills to land a job on your own by going to a university or by going through a program or bootcamp. That's actually why we built our other program, uxui Expert. That's our flagship program and it's meant to help you fully transition to UX. By the end of uxui Expert, you'll walk away with 2 unique case studies that are wholly your own. You'll also have a portfolio that stands out and you'll possess the knowledge on how to land a job in the field. The program is highly personalized to your needs. We provide one-on-one mentorship and career guidance to every single student. Anyway, let's get back on track. We'll start this free course the same way we do in our other programs. We want you to take a moment and reflect on why you're here. We believe that knowing your why will make you more successful in this course. So, why are you doing this? Why do you want to learn UX? Everybody in life has deep motivations. You need to know what yours are because they're going to keep you going long after your surface level motivations have run out. So why? Why are you here? What do you hope to get out of all of this? Maybe you're tired of dealing with client and stakeholder subjectivity on a daily basis. Or maybe you feel like you've hit an artificial ceiling and there's no upward mobility in your career. Or maybe you want a career that pays you well. Or it could be that you want to have a positive impact on other people's lives and you can't do that in your current role. Maybe it's all of them. Maybe it's none of them. Whatever your why is, just know that we have your back and are excited to see you succeed. One last reminder before signing off. Don't forget to get the free course materials. Head over to the free UX course page on kickassux.com and sign up to receive the free resources in your inbox. Well, that's it for the introduction. We are super psyched to be part of your UX journey. We'll see you in the next lesson.
Hey, what's up Kickass fam? So, as part of this free UX course, you will solve a problem for a company called REI. It's an outdoor recreation service company. So let's dive into the project brief. REI is currently the best place to find and shop for top-of-the-line hiking equipment and apparel. Please go take a look at the website by going to rei.com. With this UX project, your goal is to help people find nearby hikes and backpacking trips so they can plan for their next adventure. Currently, the website doesn't have any interactive resources to plan outdoor adventures. Next, let's talk about the two main users who use this type of service. First, day hikers who look for hikes within a few hours of where they live. Second, backpackers who look for multi-day overnight trips in the outdoors. Keep in mind that hikers and backpackers, the users, can be subdivided into two user types. First, non-registered users. These are people who have not registered to the REI site yet. That means that they cannot add ratings, comments, or write trip reports. And second are REI users. These are users who have an REI account which allows them to add ratings, trip reports, and save hikes. Now that you have a general understanding of the users, let's go over a few reasons why you should build this solution. First, so that REI becomes the hub for everything hiking and backpacking, so that people can not only purchase gear, but also know where to go on the next adventure. Second, hiking and backpacking is on the rise. From 2006 to 2019, the number of hikers increased by 66% in the US. And third, it's a great monetization opportunity as it allows REI to make product recommendations based on the type of hike a user selects. Let's now talk about the features to consider. These are examples of solutions that you might or might not consider depending on where your problem definition takes you. Find hikes, view interactive map, see hikes on the map, view wildfires on the map, search for hikes, filter hikes by, rating, mileage, elevation gain, trail features, for example coast, river, waterfalls, etc., animals allowed, kid-friendly, parking pass, for example non-required, national park pass, etc., submit a trip report, which means the ability to write a hike review, add pictures, rating, etc. Share a hike, for example link, text, email, etc. One more time, just to be clear. We are not saying that you have to design for all these use cases. This is just for inspiration and to get your creative juices going. Remember that all good UX starts with a solid understanding of the problem. So you don't go and start designing solutions before you deeply understand the problem. Alright, and before we wrap up, let's talk about the three main competitors. All Trails, Gaia, WTA, Washington Trails Association. That's it for the project brief. That's all you need to get started. Finally, remember that we also included the project brief in the Figma workbook. So if you don't have your workbook yet, go download it at kickassux.com under the free UX course page. Good luck completing this project. You got this. Hey Kickass fam, so wanted to make a quick video to help you navigate and use the workbook that we created for you. So here is the workbook, right? It's on your desktop, or let's say on your Mac, and then when you double click it, it just doesn't work. So it's a Fig file, but it doesn't let you automatically open Figma. That's a problem, right? So how do you actually open this file? So the way to do this is you open Figma and you'll see that there is an import file button here. When you click on this button, you'll then be able to import the file. So you do this, you click open, and then it will open up. And then once you have your file in your Figma, here is what you'll see. First of all, we have a cover for the free UX course. We give you a few tips to get started. We totally encourage you to download the desktop app. And then here you will see that there are a few recommended plugins. It's really up to you if you want to get them or not. And one more thing is our answers. There are a few screens that we hid from you so that you can check the answers later on without having to see the answer right away. So you can actually do the exercise without cheating pretty much, right? So here is the first tab, right? I'm going to show you what that in action. Here is the industry SWOT and competitive analysis tab. This is for the first phase of the UX process, which is research and understanding. And here you'll see that, you conduct your industry trends, and there is this transparent one here Same for SWOT analysis, you'll see there is a transparent one, it's our answers, and same for competitive analysis. And this is the same for all pages. First, you do the exercise, you do everything you have to do, and then when the time comes to actually check and you want to compare your answers with our answers, there are two ways to do this, right? So you can click here and then press 0 on your keyboard, just 0. And then the other way is that you will see that when you select that frame, you see that there is a pass-through of 0%. If you change that to be 100%, once again, you'll see it, 0% is back to transparent. So that's how you can check your work against ours so that you can make sure that you're moving forward with confidence. The next thing that you will do, so think of this left-hand side panel as all the steps that you will need to take in order to complete the case study. So we start by conducting an industry SWOT and competitive analysis that will give you a good idea of the business environment just at a glance, right? You don't want to be a business, you're not here to be a business analysis, you're here for UX design. But because UX is at the center of the user, the business, and the technology, you don't want to miss out on any of this, right? So that's why having a little bit of context from a business standpoint will truly help you. So next, once you have that overall view, then you will frame the problem. And framing the problem exercise is absolutely amazing. It's one of the cornerstones of how we teach UX. And I hope that, this exercise will give you more clarity into the problem, will help you understand the bounds of your problem. So this is a very important exercise. Then once you're done with this, there are 5 interviews that we conducted for you. Here is everything that people said, and then you can just read it. And at the end of each transcript, what we want you to do is write your 5 key takeaways and all the takeaways. That's all you have to do, right? So we gave you 2 examples here and here of how we did this, and then it's really up to you to figure out how you want to do the rest. And then the next step is once you understand the data from those interviews, then you want to chunk it down into smaller cards, right? You want to break down the problem. You want to break down all this amount of data, because back in the user interview tab, that's a lot of data, right? How do you actually make sense of it? How do you actually start understanding, seeing the patterns, seeing the trends forming? Well, the Affinity diagram is the best way to do this. And this is where you're going to do this. And then once again, if you want to check our answers, it's right here. And once you're done with this exercise, you will understand the problem much better. And that means that you might want to reframe the problem. The problem might not have changed, in which case that's fine. You don't need to reframe it. But if you've noticed that after learning a lot from this Affinity diagram, you're like, you know what? The problem I was about to solve is not exactly right. Then that's exactly what you would do. You would reframe the problem here. And then you go to the next step, which is to analyze competitors' solution. That's just to get the creative juices going, just to see, how do competitors solve a similar problem. We don't want you to copy them. It's just for you to gain an understanding of how it's done out there and see, weigh the pros and cons of each, see how that could influence your designs. So once you're done with this, then you go on to sketching. This is pen and paper. It needs to be very fast and iterative. You don't want to be in Figma. If you have a whiteboard at home, then even better, just use that whiteboard, draw a bunch of different iterations for your solution. And then once you're done with this, you will then start your digital wireframes. You can use our Lo-Fi wireframe kit, or you can build your own components entirely by yourself. It's really up to you. We'll leave it up to you. And the last part will be creating your user flows. From beginning to end, how does a user achieve a goal? Where do they start? What do they do in the middle? How does it end? And once you have that, then once you have that full flow, you understand how the user is going to be able to achieve their goal. And that's the case study workbook in a nutshell. And so we hope that you like it. And if you have any questions, we'd be super happy to help. And good luck. Cheers. Hey, what's up, Kick-Ass fam? So, designers love to be creative, they love to solve problems, but we see a lot of them struggle in the career. So is it time for you to look into UX? Before we start, to follow along our course, go download the lesson slides at kickassux.com under the free UX course page. Now let's get started and talk about why graphic, UI, and web designers switch to UX. Over the past few years, we've talked to hundreds of designers looking to transition into UX. They'd lost passion for their jobs and thought UX was the best route. With every new conversation, we kept hearing the same four things over and over. First, they were tired of the subjectivity of visual design. They worked tirelessly producing beautiful, pixel-perfect work, only to be confronted with stakeholders' opinions. They would consistently have to go back and redo their work based on opinions they didn't even agree with. And they had no way to defend their work. How many times has this happened to you? You're given a design task, you go into your creative cave, and you spend a ton of time crafting beautiful, pixel-perfect designs. You pour your heart and soul into the work, and you really believe in what you created. Yet, when showing it to stakeholders, it feels like hitting a wall of subjectivity. They respond with things like, "I kind of like it, but it doesn't look quite right to me." Or, "I think this is cool, but it doesn't work for us." Or, "I'm underwhelmed." Or even, "This isn't what I was looking for." By the 50th iteration, you're saying, "Kill me, I'm done with this." Not only it is mentally exhausting, it makes you feel like you only exist to take orders. Like your only purpose is to push pixels until your manager or client is happy. That's why we're so passionate about empowering designers to go past this problem thanks to UX. It is a game changer. More on that later. But the thing is that we heard plenty of horrible stories from tons of designers. And this one may sound familiar. You're working on a design project and go to a meeting with a few other stakeholders. Everyone wants to come together to help ideate on the best design possible. While this sounds great, not everyone agrees on the final design. So it becomes design by committee. You hear a ton of different opinions and can't fully defend your design decisions against the barrage of conflicting feedback. Usually this means the design quality takes a massive nosedive. And what about this situation? An executive stakeholder or client wants to listen in on a meeting. When seeing your designs, they ask to add something that makes the composition feel unbalanced and diminishes your role as a designer. Because they are higher up in the company, you don't feel you have the authority to push back against their decision. In these situations, trying to defend your visual design decisions is pretty much like talking to a huge wall of subjectivity. It can feel even more frustrating when stakeholders don't know design principles. Battling against subjectivity can seriously chip away at your passion for graphic design. After all, hitting the subjectivity wall might be okay a few times, but after the 50th or 100th time, it's normal to start losing passion. Your enthusiasm for graphic design might still be intact, but maybe not as a career. Second, they felt sick of taking orders and pushing pixel until their manager or client felt happy. Third, they were done just making things pretty and wanted to make an impact. They wanted a deeper motive and felt like visual design was too surface level by itself. Last, they felt visual design was too narrow and their creativity was constrained. They wanted to expand their creativity to full product design, not just the visual assets. But here is the thing, we're only just scratching the surface here. Some designers are so done with a career. Here are a few quotes from fellow graphic, visual, or UI designers we've heard. Let's start with this one. "Quite frankly, salary. I can't make a living in graphic design, and I have experience in physical product design and graphic." Or, "My biggest pain is not being valued for the work I do and feeling like an afterthought to put a band-aid over an issue." Or even, "Currently, my largest pain is that I deal with people who have a knife for design and then ask you to make design changes that either fall out of brand or the elements of design. And because my salary sucks, I don't really care about defending my stance." Do you see why we are passionate to empower designers to become kick-ass UX designers? They aspire to become valued team members who are fairly compensated for the work they do. Who wouldn't want that? When we ask them, designers have great aspirations such as, "I want to ensure that my designs are research-based and solve user and business needs." Or this person who said, "I'm looking into UX as I would love to work on the whole process of creating a product that will fit to the end user needs effectively, not just making it look pretty." You get the point. There is a chance that one or several of these statements resonate with you. If any of them do resonate with you, that can be tough to live with on a daily basis. Over time, these feelings truly undermine your passion for the field. That's where UX comes in. Instead of going up a huge wall of subjectivity from your boss and clients, you only have to jump over small subjective hurdles, which is much easier thanks to user research. While subjectivity still exists in UX design, there are plenty of strategies you can use to mitigate it. There are so many benefits transitioning from graphic designer to UX designer. You go from being an order taker to a decision maker. As a UX designer, you have the creative freedom to explore many ways to solve a problem. In fact, that's a big part of the job. And then test your ideas with actual users so you have real-world data to back up your design decisions. As a UX designer, you go from just making things pretty to making things beautiful and useful, relevant, and meaningful for people. You go from just creating the visual design to a multifaceted creative career where you broaden your impact. You're in tune with the people who use the product because you've taken the time to understand their problems and needs. And on top of all of that, you still retain the ability to create high-fidelity designs that look stunning. We are willing to bet that once you get a taste of UX, you will not want to go back. So why are graphic designers incredibly well positioned to become top-performing UX designers? Put simply, it's because they already have a ton of visual design expertise. This is what takes UX designers the longest time to master. At a high level, the UX process boils down to 4 stages: discover, create, test, build, and iterate. Basically, we first start by discovering a problem. We do research, list business requirements, and generally try to understand and empathize with users. We then start creating a bunch of basic concepts that solve their problem. We test it with actual users to get their feedback. If it doesn't go well, we repeat the process. Once it finally goes well, we move on to the last stage where we create the high-fidelity solution and hand it off for final production. For digital products, we prefer to be more specific about what we'll be doing during each phase. So this is what we personally call each of the 4 stages of the UX process. First is research and understanding. Second is information architecture and wireframing. Third, prototyping and usability testing. And fourth, visual design and handoff. The last and fourth stage is something that you already have a bunch of experience with, making the learning curve much smaller. While you may have never worked on actual user interfaces, you already went through years of creative trial and error. This has helped build your sense of why something looks good or bad. The same fundamentals of graphic design apply to the visual design side of UX. The lack of visual design experience is why so many entry-level UX designers have a really hard time getting into UX. Many entry-level UXers are great at creating high-level designs that solve a problem. Unfortunately, they don't have the experience with putting the visuals together. This leads to often cluttered, confusing, and ugly-looking designs that make the overall experience fall short. The entry-level UX market is extremely competitive. Many candidates can't get in the industry because they lack visual design skills. UX designers are expected to be able to handle the whole process themselves. If an entry-level UXer has to hand off visuals to someone else, that doesn't cut it. Visual design is hard. It takes years of practice to master. As a graphic, visual, or web designer, you already put in your time. You have experience creating stunning visuals. Because of this, you're ahead of the competition. This makes it so much easier to transition from graphic design to UX. With UX, your designs are no longer just beautiful, they're also useful and meaningful to people. And yes, you can say goodbye to walls of subjectivity you used to go up against. You can back up your design decisions with user research. Here is the great thing about UX. It's not about what you like. It's not about what your teammates like. It's about creating designs that work for users.
The internet is packed with information about UX, and it can be overwhelming. This video is dedicated to giving you all of the basics you need to know about UX so you can focus on what matters. In this lesson, we'll be answering the following questions. What is UX? Why is UX important? What does the UX process look like? And what separates UX from other types of design? Before we begin, and so you can follow along, we encourage you to download our course materials at kickassux.com under the free UX course page. The link is in the description. With that out of the way, let's get started. Let's begin with the first question. What is UX? UX stands for user experience, and it's the process of making a digital or physical product or service useful, relevant, and meaningful for people. All of these descriptors are important. Let's start with useful. If a product or service doesn't help people do something they want to do, no one will actually use it. This is pretty straightforward. Next is relevant. The product or service needs to be suited for what the user is trying to accomplish. For example, imagine you're craving tacos, kind of like I am right now.
It's raining tacos.
You decide to look for a Mexican restaurant near you using Google Maps. But imagine you only get results for Thai restaurants. Google must be confused. Noodles don't belong on tortillas. Why? At least that's not what you're looking for right now. Those search results wouldn't be relevant. They might be useful at some other point, but they're not related to what you're trying to do right now. This is oversimplified, but we hope you see our point. Last, there's meaningful. Think about meaningful as a positive emotion tied to the outcome a product or service provides. This could be a sense of accomplishment, happiness, or excitement. For example, a few years ago, my friends and I went to Hawaii. We rented a house on Airbnb. The house ended up being all we'd hoped for and more. It was perfect for our trip. And as a bonus, we got to hang out with Marcus, the owner of the house. He was an awesome guy. I'll never forget Marcus and the place we stayed. Airbnb helped create a super positive memory for me, something that has a very special place in my heart. The original goal was just to rent a house in Hawaii. Not only did Airbnb help me accomplish my goal, it also had a positive impact on my life beyond the space of the app itself. We still talk about Marcus to this day. Oh yeah, by the way, we called him Marcus. Marcus! It's way more fun to say his name that way. Anyway, another example of meaningful is with Smartsheet. The Marketo University team was able to use Smartsheet to reduce the time it took to compile an executive report from 2 weeks, wait for it, down to only 2 days. That's 8 more days the team can focus on things that actually matter to them. Think about how freeing that must have felt. And on top of that, they saved the company some serious time and money, making them internal heroes. That's some meaningful UX right there. So let's come back around to the question, what is UX? UX design focuses on the interaction between physical or digital products and services like websites or apps and real people. It includes all parts of the interaction between a user and a company: the app, website, product, service, community, etc. Let's look at a simple example of UX design that we all interact with every day to some extent: a door. Imagine you walked up to this door. What would you do? Would you try to push it open, or would you try to pull it? It's incredibly unclear, kind of like the movie Donnie Darko. Adding the text push helps, but it's still problematic. The design of the handle screams to people to pull it open. That's bad UX. The basic design of the door suggests to people to do the opposite of what they should do to be successful. Instead, a door with good UX would make it clear to people what action they should take before they try to open the door. Let's now look at a digital example of UX by walking through a hypothetical example about Amazon. Let's say that you take the bus to work. On the way, you enjoy listening to podcasts. Unfortunately, one day your headphones break. You're too busy to go to the store, so you decide to buy a new pair on Amazon. You open their mobile app, search for wireless headphones, then filter the results by products that have more than 4 stars. You spend the next 20 minutes reading through product reviews to find the best pair for your needs. Finally, you make the purchase. 2 days later, your headphones arrive in an Amazon branded box. That scenario encompasses the user experience of Amazon. Your goal was to buy a high quality pair of headphones to use on your commute. Amazon helps you accomplish your goal by giving you the ability to search for the type of headphones you are looking for and then letting you compare products based on others' reviews. The fulfillment of that goal came when your headphones arrived at your door in an Amazon box. There's a significant distinction to call out in this diagram. It's that the user interface, or UI, is part of the overall user experience of Amazon. There's a big misconception out there that UI is completely separate from UX. That's just not true. It's one of the pillars of UX as a whole. It's a subset. The entire user experience from this example spans from the start of the user problem all the way until their goal is fulfilled. The user interface of Amazon played a small but critical part of that experience. Without the UI, the user wouldn't have been able to accomplish their goal and get their headphones. With this in mind, let's talk about the 6 core disciplines of UX. First is user research, second, business analysis, third, information architecture, fourth, content strategy, fifth, interaction design, and sixth, visual design. That's a lot of hats to wear. There are many people that specialize in just one of those disciplines. Ludovic and I, on the other hand, are considered to be UX designer generalists, which means we wear all of those hats. That's also what we teach our students to be, UX generalists. As a user researcher, you're the voice for the user. You'll conduct user interviews, usability studies, heuristic evaluations, and surveys. You'll also build empathy maps, affinity maps, personas depending on whether or not your company believes in them or not, and research reports. As a business analyst, you need to understand the business strategy. You'll help ensure business objectives are being considered throughout the design process. As an information architect, you'll build the foundation and framework of the design. You'll design the navigation, create sitemaps, build the taxonomy, and organize information logically through schemes and structures. As a content strategist, you're in charge of creating the content. Go figure. You'll help write copy and create, organize, and map content. As an interaction designer, you bring the design to life. You'll create storyboards, sketches, wireframes, prototypes, and animations that map to users' mental models. And finally, as a visual designer, you make the designs beautiful. You'll create style guides, apply color theory, choose typography, create graphics, build icons, and design the final user interface. As a UX generalist, you have to wear all those hats at some point or another. One last point before moving on. As a designer, you're a problem solver. All types of design out there, from graphic design to UI design, are about solving problems. You start with what needs to be accomplished and how people react to what's in front of them and why. As a UX designer, your number one priority is to understand and solve user problems. Okay, at this point, we've answered the question, what is UX? Let's now answer, why is UX important? First and foremost, think back to the definition of UX we provided earlier. UX makes everyday things useful, relevant, and meaningful. Second, UX helps you build empathy with the people who are using the product. This helps you to see the world through their eyes and to build products that truly help them. Third, UX helps you differentiate your product from the competition. Using the right UX methods, you learn about what your competitors are doing, what gaps are in the market, and how you can do it better. It then helps you validate your designs to ensure that the product or feature will be successful before you've even launched. And finally, UX helps you create products that are accessible. Through testing and accessibility guidelines, we can make certain the products we create can be used by most people. The next logical question is, what does the UX process look like? Or how do I even do this? UX designers follow a user-centered design process. This process contains methods and techniques from each of the 6 disciplines we mentioned earlier that take the user into account at every stage of the product lifecycle. It allows you to turn a user problem from a set of questions and assumptions into a real-world solution. When you look up UX or a UX process on Google, it can be confusing to see what seems to be many different UX processes out there. It doesn't matter what you call the UX process or what the infographic looks like. At a high level, the UX process boils down to 4 stages. 1, discover, 2, create, 3, test, and 4, build and iterate. Basically, we first start by discovering a problem. We do research, list business requirements, and generally try to understand and empathize with users. Once we understand the problem and what the users are going through, we start creating a bunch of basic concepts that solve their problem. After we've settled on one concept that solves their problem, we test it with actual users to get their feedback. If it doesn't go well, we repeat the process. Once it finally does go well, we move on to the last stage where we create the high-fidelity solution and hand it off for final production. For digital products, we prefer to be more specific about what we'll be doing during each phase. So this is what we personally call each of the 4 stages of the UX process that we just talked about. First is research and understanding. Second, information architecture and wireframing. Third, prototyping and usability testing. And fourth, visual design and handoff. Each of these stages contains a set of tools and methods to solve a user problem. It's important to note that these stages aren't necessarily linear, and it's not a step-by-step process. It's typical to jump back and forth between different phases. Think of this process as being dynamic. Depending on the context and the problem you're solving, you'll apply the methods that make the most sense. Let's now look at each stage of the UX process. First, research and understanding. Before starting the designs for any successful UX project, we need to fully understand a few things: the business, the user, the product, and the problem we're solving. That's why research and understanding always comes at the start of any project. That's also why one of the first things we do on any project is what we call framing the problem. This is a living document that we use as a North Star throughout the UX process to provide clarity and help us focus on what we actually need to solve. Framing the problem is important because it helps align the company's goals with the project we're working on. It also identifies the questions that need to get answered through research. After framing the problem, we create a research plan. We use the questions from framing the problem to guide our choice of research methods, such as user interviews, usability testing, and surveys. We've talked about this before, but we'll say it many times over. Don't just use a research method because you think you ought to. Each research method you employ should help you answer the research questions you listed in framing the problem. If a method doesn't do that, do the opposite of Nike and just don't do it. After conducting a few of these research methods, you'll have data to analyze. As a UXer, it's your job to read between the lines of what users are doing and get to why they're doing it. A really great method that designers use to combine their research into actionable and understandable chunks is by creating an affinity diagram. An affinity diagram groups your research data into categories that help you see patterns across all of your research. From there, you might take the categories and insights from the affinity diagram and create personas. A persona is a fictional representation of your target user created by grouping user data gathered through research. They help keep the user at the center of your process. If during the UX process you get stuck, you can always look back and ask what your personas would need in that situation. Before moving on, it's important to point out that personas are a controversial topic in the UX world. There are many that believe that personas are a fantastic design tool. Others, not so much. We typically fall into the camp that doesn't believe in personas. We only bring this up just so that you understand that personas are not a tool that's universally used. One last thing before moving on. We just wanted to call out that there are plenty of projects out there that don't have a lot of research backing them. That could be because there wasn't much time to complete research, or maybe they didn't have access to finding people to interview, or the timeline, or whatever reason. There are plenty of reasons why people don't end up having research at the beginning of their process. And that's fine. What matters is that you're using data to back up your decisions. So if you do not have time to complete, let's say, user interviews or do usability testing on an existing product, then what matters is that you're finding data to back up your decisions. Cool. With that out of the way, after you've completed the research analysis, you're ready to start the second phase, information architecture and wireframing. This phase is where you use your research insights to plan your designs and generate as many solutions as possible. Think of this phase as if you were in charge of building a house. This is the time when you lay down the foundation. It's what supports the overall structure. In this phase, you might create sitemaps, scenarios, storyboards, user stories, sketches, user flows, and wireframes. Wireframes are an essential part at this stage. A wireframe is a simple black and white skeleton of a website or application. It structures the initial details and concepts for a project. Wireframes also help clarify design direction and intended functionality. They're one of the most common and important deliverables in UX. It's critical to wireframe out many ideas for any given problem. The best designs only come after considering many different ways to solve a problem. Once you have a decent grasp on the design direction, it's time for the prototyping and usability testing phase where you'll validate your designs. In this phase, you'll create a test plan, build a prototype, run usability tests, and create a report based on your findings. Depending on the feedback you receive, you can either move back to wireframing, repeat this process, and incorporate what you learned back into a prototype to retest, or proceed on to the next phase. It's important to point out that similar to research and understanding, there are definitely projects where we don't have time to run usability testing. While it's ideal to be able to run usability testing to validate our concepts, there are plenty of times where it's not necessary. Maybe you're basing your designs on a really well understood design pattern. Maybe you have data from some other research project that you've already done. There are plenty of reasons why, but we just wanted to call out that usability testing isn't always necessary. It's always great to do if you have the time and resources to do it because it does help validate your designs and provide you with data to back up your decisions, but we just want to call out that it's not always necessary. However long it does take to go through the prototyping and usability testing phase, once you've decided to move on past it, it's now time for the visual design and handoff phase of the UX process. This is where you take your wireframes, add color, fonts, images, and graphics to create the final designs. This might sound simple, but it can take a while to get it to look and feel just right. This can get pretty complicated because you have to balance new functionality with existing company design patterns such as color choice, button styles, and the controls you use. During this stage, you may also get feedback from your users on the designs. You can get the feedback using static screens or by testing a nicer looking, more detailed prototype. This is also the time to create animations to show how the design is intended to look and behave. Finally, when you feel like everything is just right and you have the approval from your project stakeholders, you'll hand off your designs to the engineers. This is where you work directly with the developers to implement your designs. Typically, the handoff phase includes deliverables such as UX specifications of color, spacing, behavior, and animations, which can all be handled through applications like Figma and Zeppelin and the cloud storage app of your choice. As the designs get built into code, you'll test them and give the developer feedback. This allows you to make sure that the product looks and behaves as close to your designs as possible. Once you're done with all of that, it's time to iterate on your work. Depending on the product and the product goals, once the product is out in the wild, you'll see how it performs and follow the process again and improve it even more. And that's the beauty of the UX process. It's a low-pressure way to figure out what the right solution is. It takes the burden off of your shoulders to be a design genius. Instead, you can talk directly to and get feedback from users to then immediately give them the product that they just told you they needed. In short, if you continually follow the UX process, at some point, you'll end up at the right solution. And that's it. That's the whole process. Here's the summary that shows you the types of things you'll be doing at each stage. Again, it's important to point out that you don't have to use each of these methods to solve a problem. Instead, think of the UX process as being flexible and dynamic, and each phase as having its own unique toolkit. Different problems require different tools to solve them. For example, you wouldn't use a hammer to bash a screw into place. A hammer doesn't help you solve that problem. It might help you relieve some pent-up aggression, but video games would probably be less destructive. In this case, the tool you would be looking for is a screwdriver. Similarly, you don't use a UX method just because or to check a box saying that you did. For example, not every project needs a survey. Depending on your goals, it might make sense to use one, but it's not something you use on every project. Again, think back to what we said in an earlier video. You are a UX treasure hunter. You take the best next step based on what you know currently and what you still need to learn. This same principle applies to almost all UX methods and techniques. Only use what you need to solve the problem effectively and efficiently. That's a big part of what makes up your expertise as a UX designer, understanding when and why you would use a particular method. At the end of the day, this makes almost every UX project unique. Sometimes you conduct user interviews, create affinity diagrams, build sitemaps, conduct task analyses, and other times you don't. So anytime you're going through a project, first figure out what you're trying to solve and then determine what methods to use to solve it. Now that you have a general understanding of the UX process and the methods used during each stage, you can see how each of the 6 core disciplines applies across the process. For example, information architecture is involved starting at the end of research and understanding all the way into visual design and handoff. Now, let's tackle the last question. What separates UX from other types of design? Research is the foundation of UX. It informs our choices and helps us build designs that truly solve user problems. The UX process makes design decisions objective because decisions are based on user feedback and not just our own opinions. By contrast, other types of design can be mostly subjective. Many of the decisions are based on the opinions of the designer or other stakeholders involved in the project. To highlight this, let me tell you a very real story that I got to witness firsthand. When I first started in UX, I was tasked with redesigning a pricing page for a website. Our goal was to improve or maintain the conversion rate. If you're unfamiliar with the term conversion rate, that's the percentage of users who take a desired action. Our other goal was to make the user interface look more modern. I worked with a graphic designer and a product manager on this project. During the first meeting, the graphic designer showed the latest mockups he had created. The product manager told him to change everything around just because. I'm not kidding. She wanted to add more buttons, different colors for the buttons, and generally wanted to move things around. Why? Because she liked it that way. There was no design logic behind it. And the worst part, there was nothing the designer could say or do to change her mind. I really felt for the graphic designer. It was a terrible situation to be in. Fortunately, unless you work with the Grinch, you don't have to worry about that as a UX designer because you can support your design decisions with real data from real people who actually use your product. Yes, there are people on the team where even when you present them data, they still believe their opinions matter more, but still, while subjectivity still does exist in UX, having data helps to alleviate a lot of it. You have more than just design principles to fall back on, and that's really what separates UX from other types of design. UX design is focused on the user, business, and technology needs and relies on user research. Other types of design are mostly focused on stakeholder needs and rely far more on principles. So with all of that said, with everything we've gone through, the UX process creates certainty in a product well before it's even created. We design products that are easy to use and are what users are looking for. One last thing before signing off, as a quick reminder, don't forget to go download our course materials at kickassux.com under the free UX course page. We'll see you in the next video. There's one thing that most UX bootcamps and universities don't teach their students, and it's honestly hurting their chances of landing a job as a UX designer. What's that one thing? That's what I'm going to cover in this video. So here's the thing. The UX process isn't linear, but for some reason, some bootcamps and universities teach their students to follow the process like a linear checklist. That's just plain wrong. The best way to describe UX design is as a critical thinking process where you take the best next step depending on the information you currently know and what you need to answer. Here's another way to describe it. As a UX designer, you're basically a treasure hunter. You start with one clue on your treasure map, aka the problem. This provides you with your bearings and what you need to do first. So you follow the first clue and take the best next step to find the second clue. You're always basing your next decision on the previous clue and the data you've gathered so far about the treasure hunt. Eventually, after finding many clues and basing your decisions on your research, you'll have found the treasure, aka built the product or feature. With that metaphor in mind, in UX, you don't do something just because. If you were searching for a treasure, you wouldn't just go dig a random hole in a random spot, right? Similarly, in UX, you do something because you need to know the answer before moving forward. For example, you don't conduct user interviews just because you think you ought to. You might do them because you have questions that can only be answered by users, or maybe you need to validate your concept with them, or a plethora of other reasons. Regardless of the reason, you need to have a why behind doing something. Again, you use your critical thinking powers to determine your best next step based on your current position, what you know, and what you need to learn. As a UX designer, unless you're working with a researcher, you are the decision maker behind what research is done for the project you're working on, which is why it's so important that you don't look at UX as a checklist or a linear process. With most projects in the real world, you jump back and forth between different phases of the UX process. You always base your decisions on the data you currently have and what you still need to answer. If you can get your answers from other products in the market, great. If you can get them from existing research, fantastic. If you have to get answers from users, that's also great. Unfortunately, many bootcamps and universities teach that this is the only way, and if you don't do it this way, you're doing it wrong. That's absolutely false. The point is, you don't always have to be the one conducting user research to be following a human-centered process. What matters is that you're basing your decisions on data. With that in mind, when you're done with our free UX course, we want you to start thinking through what questions you need to answer and how you'll go about getting those answers so you can solve your problem. That's where framing the problem comes in, and we'll cover that in a few lessons. Framing the problem is one of the very few things we do on every project, regardless of project size. It helps provide you with a true understanding of the problem and what questions you need to answer so you know you're creating the right solution for the user. You then use that document as a North Star throughout any given UX project. You continually check back in with that document to make sure you're solving the right problem and that you've answered all of your questions. So with all of this in mind, in the future, when you're using your newfound UX skills, we want you to start thinking like a UX treasure hunter. Always be asking yourself, what's the best next step to take based off of what I know now and what I still need to learn? Then do the thing that makes the most sense. You got this.
Hey, what's up, Kick-Ass fam? So, you're interested in learning more about UX, but there is tons of conflicting information out there, and it's easy to assume the wrong things and get into bad habits. So it doesn't happen to you. In this lesson, we'll talk about the most common UX misunderstandings. Thanks to the previous lesson, you have a general idea of what UX is about. Let's take some time to go over what it is not, starting with the number one misunderstanding. UX equals UI. UI stands for user interface, which refers to the visuals a user interacts with in a product or service. It connects the user with the product's functionality. In the job title UX designer, the word that everyone gets caught up on is designer, and traditionally that meant working on the aesthetic of a product. While UI plays a role in UX, it's only one of the things that UX designers tackle on a daily basis. Think of UI as a subset of UX. Remember the 6 core disciplines of UX that we covered in the previous lesson? Visual design is only one part of UX. It's not the whole thing, as many think it is. The primary focus of a UX designer is to identify and solve a problem that helps users accomplish their goal while meeting business objectives. This means that far before getting into the how, it's crucial to understand the why and what. Furthermore, when UX designers get into the how, they first start with sketches, and soon after low-fidelity mockups, where UI is not a concern. The starting point of any good UX is done on a whiteboard or with pen and paper. This, by definition, is low fidelity, because there is a small amount of detail. It's meant to be iterative and fast. The goal of starting with lo-fi is to test your early concepts and ideas with users. Testing lo-fi mockups with users helps you gain an understanding of what works and what doesn't. This allows you as a designer to move forward, confident that you are tackling the right problem for the right people. Early designs that are too high fidelity will ultimately slow you down, and any feedback you receive will be focused on the visual and less about functionality. You will get bogged down in the minutiae and will miss out on learning what works functionally. Imagine you're tasked with building an alarm clock. You wouldn't want to start by focusing on finished materials like wood or carbon fiber. Instead, you'd want to start by researching the target audience and their needs. That way you can create a product that is useful, relevant, and meaningful for people. Maybe you learn to research that the target audience for this alarm clock is people with visual impairment. They don't care about the finished materials. They want big numbers and large knobs. In this scenario, a pretty alarm clock that doesn't serve their goals is useless. All in all, UX shouldn't be confused with UI. Visual design is only one aspect of UX. The second misunderstanding: UX designers need to be able to code. The ability to code in UX design is an ongoing and polarizing debate. Some swear by it and argue that it's necessary for UX designers to know at least some coding. The usual reason provided for this argument is that it arms UX designers with a deeper understanding of how products are built, which in turn enables them to create products that are more feasible to develop. On the other side, there are people who believe that UX designers should not have to know how to code. Our point of view on this subject is clear. In order to get your first job in UX, you don't need to know how to code. Period. Once you get in the field of UX, and if you are interested in becoming more technically savvy with code, then by all means do it. It can only help you forge closer relationship with developers, and that's a good thing. The vast majority of UX designers we know don't know how to code. If that many people got a job without that technical knowledge, so can you. The third misunderstanding: UX is just about the user. Yes, it is about the user, and there is so much more to it. UX meets at the intersection of user goals, business objectives, and technical feasibility. Finding that balance is key. Understanding what the business is trying to accomplish is critical. For example, if a specific feature of a product negatively affects retention, this will impact profitability. This is crucial information for you to know. It tells you that you need to redesign that feature, with a focus on retaining users. The same thing applies to technology. How useful would it be if you created the best user experience, but it was technically impossible to implement? While users are of course central to UX, business and technology are an equal part of the equation. The fourth misunderstanding: only UX designers can have input on the design. This misunderstanding is directly related to the one we just talked about. Though it may sound surprising, UX is everyone's business. Product managers, developers, marketing, sales, all have a say in the final experience. It doesn't matter how great of a user experience you create if developers can't build it. At the same time, it doesn't matter how great your design is if the team can't market it or sell it. It's problematic if a marketing team creates a vision that doesn't match the product. That will negatively impact sales. The point is that UX affects every team. That's why they all must have a seat at the table. UX is everyone's business. The fifth misunderstanding: your design is your baby. Do you want to know how to spot mediocre UX designers? The ego is buried inside their designs. As soon as someone gives them negative feedback, they get tense, defensive, and stop listening. Don't be that person. You have to be able to step back and be objective about your designs. You are not your designs. Approach them with an open and curious mind. Be open to feedback. Don't assume that you've thought of everything or that you've designed it in the best way possible. User research is your best friend. Data gathered from user research helps you be objective about your designs. We highly recommend thinking at least twice before socializing a design that has little to no user research to back it up. Mediocre UX designers fall in love with a solution, while great ones fall in love with a problem. On to the last misunderstanding: you are like the user of your product. Don't fight it, okay? You are not your user. It's easy to assume that if a design is clear to you, then it will also be clear to your users. If that's what you believe, you couldn't be more wrong. Users often struggle with the most simple interactions. Sometimes they will not see a button you want them to click on. Sometimes they will get confused that they don't know where to start. In your mind you're like, come on, it's right in front of you, don't you see it? The point is that until you've tested your designs with users, you should not assume anything. They might approach the task or user interface in a totally different way. You don't know, and that's fine. There are things that you want to learn so you can make your designs user-friendly. As a quick recap, these are some of the most common misunderstandings about UX. We hope we've cleared this up for you. Feel free to take a screenshot or download our slides on kickassux.com under the free UX course page. Hey, what's up, Kickass fam? So, stakeholder relationship is at the center of creating great products. Unfortunately, there are a lot of stakeholders which can be really confusing. So in this video, we'll go over the key stakeholders you will typically encounter, and we'll tell you how to effectively communicate with each of them. The main people that you will interact with are product managers, owners, PMs, developers, devs, and executives. Secondary stakeholders include project managers, the marketing creative team, and/or external influencers like IT or sales. As a UX designer, you're responsible for researching and creating the designs that will be built by the developers. Let's dig into the specifics. During the research and understanding phase, you will work with your PM to understand the business problem that you are solving. If you have UX researchers at your company, you will help them put together a research plan to understand user goals. If you don't, you will be the one completing all the research tasks. Once you have clarity on the business and user goals, you will work with a PM, UX researcher, lead developers, and other stakeholders to frame the problem. Then you, your PM, and devs would listen into user interviews conducted by the UX researcher. You'll analyze the data with the researcher to come up with a general design direction. Once you've defined the exact problem to solve and the product team is on board, you will go on to the next phase of the UX process, information architecture and wireframing. In this phase, you mostly work with the product manager. They'll provide feedback on your storyboard, story map, and wireframes. Also, make sure to involve devs during this phase to ensure that your designs are feasible and realistic. In general, it's a good practice to continually check in with devs and involve them throughout each phase to ensure they can actually develop your designs. Then, in the next phase, prototyping and usability testing, you will work alongside a product manager and UX researcher to put together a usability test plan that defines all the tasks that your prototype will account for. That way, you can create an end-to-end prototype with all the necessary screens and interactions. Then, you, your PM, and devs would listen in to the usability tests conducted by the UX researcher. After completing your usability tests, you will work with the UX researcher to analyze the findings. This will help you develop an actionable list to address user feedback. Depending on the company you work for, once you've gained the confidence that your solution solves the problem, you'll put together a deck to share your designs and research findings. A wide array of stakeholders will listen in during that meeting, such as product managers, developers, design leadership, UX researchers, project managers, and executives. This is a make or break meeting because this is where your designs are ultimately approved or not. Finally, during visual design and handoff, you'll work with other design team members to ensure that you're using the right design patterns and that your designs are consistent within the product. Once you and your design team are satisfied with the look and feel of the final designs, you'll give them to the developers to implement. Handing over the designs is a process and not just a deliverable. Depending on the project, this can last for days, weeks, or even months. You'll collaborate with your developers very closely, provide them with the necessary assets, and answer any questions they might have about your designs. You'll also address all the edge case scenarios that developers need. For example, how does the interface resize when the screen gets smaller? Does text truncate? Etc. So you'll assist developers in interpreting your designs so that the end experience is as close as possible to what you've defined. As you can see, the UX process is not a solo practice. It's essential to be a team player and work alongside different types of stakeholders to build a successful product. As in life, communication is a central part of UX design. Learning the jargon and how to communicate with others on the team takes time. We can't stress this enough. Communicate early and often. Here is an important quote from Tom Greaver's book. The most important thing you can do to improve communication between you and your stakeholders is to improve those relationships, earn trust, and establish a rapport that will speak more for you than your words. Let's now talk about how to best communicate with each stakeholder, starting with product managers, PMs. PMs are responsible for communicating a clear vision of what needs to be done and execute it by leading cross-functional teams. They sit at the intersection of the business, marketing, development, and design teams. You can think of them as conductors who find alignment with all teams to solve business and user problems as efficiently as possible. For example, if a team has 5 months to build a feature, product managers ensure everyone shares the same vision while making sure the necessary resources are in place to ship a quality product on time. Expect to spend a lot of time with your PM. It's essential to keep them in the loop with everything you're doing so that they can ensure your progress aligns well with other teams' resources and schedules. Imagine your usability test indicates the architecture of your product has to be seriously revised. The product manager would be responsible to communicate and follow up with the team to ensure that the new architecture is built on time. Not communicating soon enough about your progress with PMs could put time pressure on other teams and result in missed deadlines. If you're falling behind, don't keep it a secret. It's impossible to manage. Be sure to communicate sooner than later. Think of a PM like the captain of a ship. They have the final say on when things happen and the general direction. As a UX designer, you're like the first mate or navigator. You set the direction and keep the captain informed so that they can make the best decisions. The PM role is to tie business and user goals together. PMs ensure their team produces a well-designed and useful solution for users. They measure this by tracking key performance indicators, KPIs. These can include adoption, engagement, and retention rates. To effectively communicate with PMs, show them how your solution solves user problems while supporting business objectives. This is why when starting a UX project, it's important to understand the desired business impact. Ask your PMs for the KPIs they will be tracking to assess the success of your solution. Now let's talk about developers, devs. Devs are the ones who actually bring your designs to life. They are the keepers of the code. Without them, there wouldn't be a product. As a UX designer, you live in a world where anything is possible. Developers, on the other hand, provide you with implementation boundaries. It's essential to involve devs as early as possible in the product development cycle so you don't run the risk of creating designs that are unnecessarily hard to implement. Keep in mind that implementation boundaries should not restrain the user experience. Design for the ideal world. If you run into complications, it's important to discuss how to scale the design back with the product manager and the lead developer so that it can still be built on time. Communicate with them early and often to bring their unique perspectives to the table. They often come up with alternative solutions and think about edge cases, error states, etc. that no one else on the team considers. It also helps them feel more involved in the product definition process. If they don't know what you're designing, they can't plan for the work. What may seem trivial to you as a UX designer could, in reality, take weeks or months for a developer to build. Also, if you don't involve them early, devs may be more reluctant about implementing your solutions because they feel like their voice haven't been heard. Once you've completed your designs, dev will ask you questions to understand how to interpret the screens you provide them. There are many details that a static image can't communicate. Provide the design specs so they can understand and code the screens you give them. Communicating with developers is a two-way street. You don't merely send them screens and hope for the best. That's a recipe for disaster. Instead, help them understand your designs. Be a good listener, be responsive to their feedback and concerns. From time to time, conversations with devs might be hard to understand. That's normal because both roles use very different vocabulary. If you don't get what they're saying, ask them to explain. You're better off telling them that you don't understand rather than nodding and not knowing what you agreed to. That's especially true for junior designers. Don't be scared to admit that you don't understand something. That will fast-track your learning. You can also invite your PM into this discussion so nothing gets lost in translation and everyone is on the same page. All in all, developers are great to work with as they provide a unique perspective and actually build what you design. If you provide them with the design spec they need, listen well, and ask them to clarify things you don't understand, you'll be well on your way to building a great relationship. It's also important not to assume that all devs fully understand UX design. In fact, you'd be surprised to learn how blurry some devs' understanding of your job is. Some have no idea that you arrived at your final designs after testing them with users. It's essential to check their understanding of UX. If they don't know much about it, help them understand more about the UX process and how users are co-creators of the solution. Otherwise, devs might push back on your designs because they might think that you came up with them entirely by yourself. When they have questions or concerns about your solution, provide them with as much context as possible. Show them all the thinking and testing that went into your designs. Often, the concerns are valid from a technical standpoint. It's your job to explain where users struggled and succeeded as an anchor for your argument. With devs, communicate the value that your designs have on the user and the business. Finally, let's talk about executives. Executives could be directors, vice presidents, or, in the case of smaller companies, the CEO. Even though execs are barely involved in the design process, their opinions can literally make or break your solution. Once you're confident that your designs effectively solve the problem and that you have enough supporting data, put together a slide deck to present your work and research findings. That's the meeting, where execs have an opportunity to chime in. Often, it may be their only opportunity to provide feedback as they have little time on their busy schedules. With execs, the key is to provide them with the certainty that you've done your due diligence to solve the user and business problems. Translate your work into numbers because that's the language they speak. Let's say that you've redesigned the sign-up experience and that the success rate went from 80 to 95%. That's something you would want to highlight. However, don't just rely on numbers. As a UX designer, you are the voice of the user. It's powerful to share some of the most impactful quotes that you've heard during the research. The key is to provide execs with the whole story so they understand how you got to your solution. Just showing them the solution without covering the business context, user context, and research findings would in most cases fail. Tell them the why and how before even bringing up the what. Finally, they will give you feedback. They have a lot of context that you don't have and often have a unique perspective. When they provide feedback, don't be defensive. Show them that you heard and value their feedback. There are two types of feedback, the type you agree with and the type that you don't. Regardless of what you think, it's crucial for you to listen to execs, ask clarifying questions, and thank them for it. Now, if you agree with the feedback, say something like, "Thank you, this is great feedback, and we'll think of a way to integrate it in the solution." Then move on and after the meeting, go fix it. If you don't agree with the feedback, ask clarifying questions to be 110% sure that you're on the same page. If you still disagree, respectfully bring the user back into the conversation and/or how the solution supports business objectives. Use the findings from your user research to back up your decisions. Then ask if that addresses their concerns. If it does, great. If it doesn't, thank them again and assure them that you'll work on it. After the meeting, check in with your manager to understand how best to proceed. Now that we covered all the primary stakeholders, let's talk about the secondary stakeholders, starting with project managers. Before we begin, it's worth noting that sometimes when people say PM, they mean project managers, not product managers. In the world of UX, when you hear people say PM, most of the time they are referring to product managers. In our case, PM designates product managers too. Now that we covered this, let's dive into more details about project managers. They want to ensure that every project is on time and under budget. They have the bird's eye view of many projects to understand how to make all teams as successful as possible. Depending on the company you work for, you might or might not interact much with a project manager. If you end up working with them, keep in mind that time and resources are the two things they care most about. If you run into a roadblock in your project, they'll want to know as soon as possible so they can provide immediate help. Depending on the situation, they might extend the project timeline and/or add a few extra resources to help you and the team move forward. Clearly communicate about the progress of your project and tell them about concerns and any other issue that could impact the schedule and budget they've set. Be proactive about it. For example, if there is a 20% chance that something might derail a project, even though it's only 20%, you need to let them know. And the sooner the better. Another type of secondary stakeholders are the marketing and creative teams. Many different roles make up the marketing and creative teams. First, there are marketers. They want to understand the problem that your solution solves as well as provide you with feedback and context. They care that the product and the marketing strategy are aligned in successfully solving the audience's pains. This enables them to market the product in ways that resonate the most with the target segment. Second, you might also work with product marketing managers who ensure that the product and the marketing teams are aligned. Without them, it's easy for both teams to work in silos and come up with a product that does one thing and a marketing strategy that misses the mark. Third, there are visual designers who create the visual that the UX designers need to polish the product experience. An example of this would be visuals for empty states or larger, more detailed icons. Fourth, there are creative directors who want to understand your project design and intent so they can help the team be aligned and set a corresponding creative direction. With the marketing team, the key is to gain mutual understanding and find alignment on how the product solves someone's problem. Marketing and UX are very similar as they both aim to solve user pains. Marketers help their audience understand why and how the solution addresses it, and UX designers design the solution itself. The goal is to help each other get aligned. That way, what's marketed describes what the product actually offers. As for the creative team, pay close attention to the style guides they use. Ensure your design follow their styles, branding requirements, etc. The goal is to ensure that any visuals that are in your product align with the creative direction set by that team. Finally, the last set of secondary stakeholders are external influencers, including IT, sales, etc. This group is much more remote and you might not directly interact with them. Yet, they will at some point gain awareness of the product you've built. It can be a good idea to reach out to the sales team to learn more about the customer from their perspective. Salespeople usually know more about users and their pains than the UX designers themselves, because they talk to customers every single day. Salespeople can be a great resource to quickly gain an understanding of the customer pains without having to conduct any research yourself. And that's it with this lesson. That was a lot of information, so don't forget to download the lesson slides. Go to kickassux.com under the free UX course page. Hopefully, this lesson gives you better clarity on what a product team looks like. But keep in mind that, depending on the company, these roles can vary. They are not set in stone.
Trying to create a product without doing the proper research is the equivalent of using a bow and arrow to shoot a target while blindfolded in the dark while riding a horse that's also blindfolded. You might hit the target, but the chances are much higher that both you and the horse will get seriously hurt. That's why this video is all about the first phase of the UX process, research and understanding. Get stoked because this phase provides you with the information necessary to create a kick-ass solution. In this lesson, we're going to cover what user research is and why it's important, what the research and understanding process generally looks like, types of research, and research biases. Let's get after it. Have you ever been in a situation where you didn't know what to get someone for their birthday? While you know this person fairly well, you just have no idea what they might want. Since you're trying to keep it a surprise, you don't come right out and ask what they want, which means you've got to take your best guess. You can't be sure they'll even like your gift. They may love it, or they may give you one of those fake smiles, say they love it, and then figure out how to return it. Think about user research as the process of finding out what your friend wants for their birthday. You cut out the uncertainty by talking to your friend, aka the user, about what really matters to them. So let's get started on what user research is and why it's important. Usability.gov defines the user research process as the focus on understanding user behaviors, needs, and motivations through observation, techniques, task analyses, and other feedback methodologies. Think about it this way. In order to provide users with an impactful solution, you need to keep users at the center of your process. How could you give someone something meaningful that solves their problem if you don't fully understand them or the problem that they're facing? Here's another way to think about it. Conducting user research makes you a detective trying to solve a mystery. You're trying to uncover the user's problem. It's your job to use whichever detective methods necessary to solve the mystery. And with that in mind, user research is the process of asking who, what, where, when, why, and how. You first need to understand who your users are, what problem they're facing, where they're facing this problem, when they're facing it, why they're facing the problem, and how they're currently facing the problem. That was a lot of saying facing the problem, but let's keep moving on. Why is the most important of all of these because why tells you the root cause of why something happened. This is the reason we recommend you use a method called the 5 whys. Basically, you ask why someone does something 5 times. The idea is that you keep asking until you understand the true reason behind the event. For example, let's say that you're trying to analyze why someone was late to work. That could go something like this. Why were you late to work? Because I got up late. Why? Because I worked late last night. Why? Because I have 3 critically important projects that I need to get done in the next week. You're probably getting tired of this, but why? Because someone was let go from our team last month and I'm now doing the work of 2 people. Why? Because there's no one else to do the work and we haven't found a replacement yet. By the end of this example, you learn the deeper reasons behind why this person was late to work. You gained insight into the problem, which is what research and understanding is all about. At the very heart of user research is the fundamental statement, you are not the user. This is what makes user research important. Because you are not the user, you don't know their problems and how they're trying to solve them. By extension, your team members are not the user. They don't always know your user's problems or how the user will behave, which is another important reason to do user research. It helps the whole team to understand who, what, where, when, why, and how. We can't even begin to tell you just how this one thing makes user research so valuable. Many times, you'll find that people on your team have already made up their minds about how things need to be solved. If there isn't research to back it up, they'll contaminate the design with their own assumptions and the user will be left wanting. Now let's discuss what the research and understanding process typically looks like. In the beginning of this phase, and before designing everything, we first need to figure out the problem we are going to solve. To do this, we use methods such as looking at industry trends, SWOT analysis, competitive analysis, researching user pains, and heuristic evaluations. Using these data points, we frame the problem by stating what the problem is, what we know about it, and how we plan on fixing it. From there, we'll start getting feedback from users either through interviews, usability tests, or more indirectly through surveys. Finally, you synthesize all of the research using affinity diagrams, personas, archetypes, or user segments, and research reports which prepare you for the next phase in the UX process. Now let's look at different types of research. On the most basic level, we can divide UX research methods into two buckets, quantitative and qualitative. Quantitative research is measured numerically. Here are a few examples of quantitative questions. How many people visited this page? How many people clicked this button? What percentage of people prefer this name for the product? How many people are using this feature? This makes surveys an excellent quantitative method of gathering information because you get responses to your questions in a numerical format. It gives you a level of understanding of what is happening or what is preferred. However, quantitative data alone doesn't address why someone takes a specific action. That's where qualitative research comes in. Qualitative research gathers non-numerical data and focuses on deriving meaning from that data. It helps you understand the deeper motivations behind behaviors and attitudes. Qualitative questions are open-ended like, what would you expect when you click that button? Why do you think that? And of course, why? Usability tests are all about watching people's behaviors when using your product. Researchers can dig into behaviors while they observe them and ask why people do what they're doing. For example, let's say that you're testing the discoverability of a new feature in your app. Quantitative data might look like 4 of 5 users found the feature. Qualitative data would be something like users who found the feature expected to see X instead of Y because Z wasn't clear. Another way you can divide up research methods is attitudinal versus behavioral. Think of it like what people say, attitudinal, versus what people actually do, behavioral. We see this all the time with New Year's resolutions, don't we? The attitudinal side of someone would say, I'm going to go to the gym and I'm going to get ripped, when in actuality, they don't ever go. That comes back to the reason we ask why so many times. When asking why enough times, you'll learn the underlying reason behind someone's behavior. While most usability studies are focused on watching users' behavior, they're also aimed at learning about how users feel, attitudinal data. Now that you have a general understanding of quantitative versus qualitative and attitudinal versus behavioral, let's look at a chart showing how different research methods are related to each of those categories. The vertical axis has attitudinal at the bottom and behavioral at the very top. The horizontal axis has qualitative on the left and quantitative on the right. This shows you that the methods located in the bottom left help you understand why someone takes a certain action, qualitative, and how they feel about it, attitudinal. The methods in the top right corner show you what people actually do, behavioral, and the numbers to back it up, quantitative. In the future, use this chart from Nielsen and Norman to pick the right research method for what you're trying to learn. Now let's talk about research biases. Have you ever heard of the phrase leading the witness? This is something in law where the prosecutor asks questions and makes statements that push the witness to say something that they normally wouldn't. That's basically the same thing as research bias, and it's something you should try to avoid. Research bias is when the researcher influences the data so that it portrays a predetermined outcome. For example, imagine that we worked at Dropbox and we wanted to test the new location for sign-up. We wouldn't want to use the term sign up in the task we gave participants. That would give them something to find on the screen and would skew our results. Instead, we might say something like, how would you go about getting a new Dropbox account? While it's almost impossible to remove research bias completely, it's important to acknowledge, accept, understand, and account for it. With all the information about user research that we just went through, we just wanted to call out one thing. Most projects don't require using the full set of methods. In fact, there are some projects that hardly use any. Instead, you always want to focus on using the methods that make the most sense for any given project. Getting back to the definition of UX we talked about in an earlier video, UX is the process of making a product or service useful, relevant, and meaningful for people. To truly do this, you need user research. With user research, you can understand the impact of your design on users. Without working with users, you're just designing based on your own subjectivity and your own bias. User research is the U in UX.
Hey, what's up, Kick-Ass fam? So, how do you know if you're solving a good business problem? Or how do you know if it's meaningful or if it's even worth pursuing? In this video, we'll help you quickly and effectively answer those questions. Before we get started, this is the first lesson where you will do exercises in the Figma workbook. So don't forget to go download the resources at kickassux.com under the free UX course page. Alright, let's get started. So we're going to talk about how you can identify a problem to solve using industry and competitive analysis. They will help you identify problems, find gaps in the market, identify business opportunities, and know how to differentiate your solutions. We'll cover how you can gain a better understanding of the market by looking at industry trends and conducting both a SWOT and competitive analysis. Alright, let's get after it. Without data, you're just another person with an opinion. Edward Deming. Many products fail because they don't solve a real user problem. Without really understanding the user, you are not practicing UX. You're subjectively designing features. To put it simply, without the user, there is no UX. It's just the X. That said, there is more to UX than just the user. UX is at the center of technology, business, and the user. Without the business, UX cannot exist, at least not as a career. Knowing the business objectives behind the feature is equally important. For now, think about this step in the process as a funnel. At the top of the funnel, you look at industry trends. Just become familiar with the market and note what's most important. Then work your way down the funnel by conducting a SWOT analysis. Last, you go down the funnel by conducting a competitive analysis. It's easier to conduct research on larger corporations, especially those that are publicly traded. Makes it far easier for you to find existing data such as investor reports and various other analyses. You can also target smaller companies if you want to for your case study, but just be aware that you'll have to dig a little bit more to find useful information. Let's go into more detail on how we work our way down the funnel. Remember, we start at the top of the funnel by looking at industry trends. For example, if your case study targets Spotify, search for music industry trends online. Don't worry about learning about Spotify or its competitors just yet. The goal of this first step is to get you immersed in the industry at large. This helps you to understand where the industry is headed. When doing this, spend at least 30 minutes reading about industry trends that relate to your company and note the key insights. Once you have done that, it's time to conduct a SWOT analysis. This will give you a more detailed insights into the company and its position in the market. SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. A typical SWOT is created in a 4-part quadrant like this. Strengths and weaknesses relate to the internal environment of the company, while opportunities and threats relate to the market, the external environment. Let's dive deeper into each category. Strengths are the internal factors that positively impact the company, such as knowledge, brand reputation, intellectual property, etc. Weaknesses are internal factors that negatively impact the company, such as low funding, poor product quality, bad customer service, etc. Opportunities are external factors that have the potential to positively impact the company, such as acquiring competitors, strong market growth predictions, international presence, etc. Threats are external factors that have the potential to negatively impact the company, such as government regulations, new competitors, economic downturns, etc. A SWOT analysis will give you a high-level idea of where the company is headed, both internally and externally. While just a SWOT analysis on its own will not help you identify a precise problem to target, it will provide you with valuable context. Using Spotify as an example, imagine that in your SWOT analysis you learn that the podcast market is growing, which is a business opportunity. Later on, When you find user pain points, you discover that users are really frustrated to have to use competitors' apps to listen to podcasts. You've just found an opportunity worth pursuing. And while the SWOT results might seem elusive at first, they will help you later when the time comes to put all the pieces together. There are two ways to approach your SWOT analysis. Either fill in the 4 categories of a SWOT by doing some in-depth research online and create it from scratch yourself, or Google your company name followed by SWOT to find analyses that have already been conducted. Once you have completed your SWOT analysis, it's time to head to the bottom of the funnel by conducting a competitive analysis. A competitive analysis answers questions like, what are your competitors' features? What solutions do competitors have that your product is lacking? What unique features does your product already have that are worth investing in? Competitive analysis helps you find ways to differentiate yourself from your competitors and to find gaps in the market. This is what an empty competitive analysis looks like. Let's still use Spotify as an example. First, figure out who the top 3 competitors are. If you don't know who they are, Crunchbase.com is a great way to find them. Otherwise, if you're designing a mobile product, the App Store or Google Play Store are a great way to find competitors. Focus on the biggest competitors and leave the rest. Second, try each product and figure out what their main features are. If you're looking to redesign a desktop app, only look at the features of competing desktop products. Similarly, if you're planning to redesign a mobile app, just look at the features of competing mobile products. Don't look across platforms as the feature set will be different. Most of the time, mobile is a simplified version of what can be found on the desktop. For example, if you're targeting mobile, download all the apps on your phone and create accounts for all 4 products, yours and the 3 competitors. Once you have access to all products, try them one by one to understand their main features. You can also look at the respective marketing sites, where they often list out the feature set. We recommend using pen and paper to start with, and write all the main features that each product offers. Start with your company and list all of its main features. Then do the same for all competitors. Don't look at the products in relation to each other. After writing the features for each product, you're ready to identify trends and potential differentiators. At this point, go back to your competitive analysis table and fill it in. Once you have completed both axes, fill the main content area with your findings. The most common answers are yes, no, or a key metric. In this example, you can see that radio shows is answered by using yes, no, and the streaming quality is answered using data such as 256 kilobytes per second, or 16 and 24 bit. Boom, that's it. Once you've finished your competitive analysis, you'll be able to identify potential gaps in the market and feature sets that can further differentiate your product from its competitors. Now we've seen the 3 techniques to identify a problem on the market: industry trends, SWOT analysis, and competitive analysis. While the SWOT analysis results may seem elusive at first, once your competitive analysis is complete, you'll be able to see trends, which will help you identify what problem to target. In the Spotify example, imagine that your SWOT analysis showed that there is growing customer interest for better streaming quality. And in your competitive analysis, you found that Spotify's streaming quality is not up to par with other competitors. This may be a path to pursue and a problem to solve. To recap, we covered researching industry trends, performing a SWOT analysis to gain a more detailed insight into the company you're targeting and its position in the market, then conducting a competitive analysis to identify gaps in the market and ways to differentiate your product. Learning about the industry helps you identify business opportunities. This is the stepping stone to knowing what problem to solve. And because UX is nothing without the user, it's important to know where the business intersects with user needs. Now it's your turn to do the exercise. Head to the Figma workbook and go to the Industry, SWOT, and Competitive Analysis tab. Happy analyzing! Hey, what's up, Kick-Ass fam? So, what's the one thing you have to do regardless of the UX project? Framing the problem. It acts as the North Star throughout the UX process. It provides clarity on what needs to be solved. And without it, you would most likely solve the wrong problem. After this lesson, you will complete the Framing the Problem exercise in the Figma workbook. Alright, let's get started. In this lesson, you will learn how to frame the problem, a process that provides focus and clarity for your project. The framing of a problem is often far more essential than its solution. Albert Einstein. Before designing anything, you need to have a solid understanding of the problem that you're solving. To get that understanding, you need to truly define the problem. What is it that you're solving exactly? Without scoping the problem and providing context for what you're after, you'll lose track of what and who you're designing for. Imagine if you were flying from New York to Warsaw, Poland. If the plane was aimed even 1 degree off course, you could end up in Romania getting eaten by vampires. In UX, the same thing happens if you don't frame the problem correctly. If you don't truly understand the problem, you could end up building the wrong solution. At the start of many UX projects, UX designers conduct what's called a stakeholder interview. These are one-on-one interviews with people such as the product manager, developers, UX manager, and any other stakeholder who has a vested interest in the project's outcome. In each interview, you record their beliefs, assumptions, and questions to help gain clarity on the direction you will take to solve the problem. Stakeholder interviews are great and are super helpful. However, we have a faster way of accomplishing this. Our method gathers stakeholder opinions, assumptions, and questions with everyone in the room, instead of the time-consuming one-on-ones. It's called Framing the Problem. Framing the Problem is a document that we create at the beginning of a project. This includes a few simple steps to gain clarity on the problem we're trying to solve and what outcomes we'd like to see. In your situation, don't worry about the fact that you're doing this on your own. That's totally fine. In the future, you will work with others on your team to produce a document like this. Framing the problem has 6 steps. The first step is to define the general problem you're solving from the business and user perspectives. Based on what you already know about the problem and what you learned during the industry and competitive analysis, write the general problem that you're solving from the business perspective. This could be lost revenue, lower user retention, or a missing feature that other competitors have. Then think through the problems users are facing and what they are feeling as they're going through the experience. You can look at product reviews, forums, or even talk to real users to learn more about how real users feel about the product experience. Step 2, you'll create a design question also called a how might we question. How might we is really important. How implies that this problem is solvable. Might implies there are many possible ways to solve the problem. And we implies that we're all going to work together to solve the problem. While you'll be completing this by yourself, in the future it's best to do this with a group to get multiple perspectives. Basically, you fill in the following sentence: how might we insert goal you're trying to have on users. The third step is to describe the specific impact you hope to have on the business and users. For example, maybe on the business side, you want to see increased engagement with this new feature, or increased revenue, or increased product stickiness, meaning customer retention. Step 4, state your assumptions associated with the problem. These are things you believe to be factually the case for your product. Stating your assumptions does 2 things. Rather than keep this information in your head, it lists out what you and other teammates believe to be certain and allows you to analyze them from a more unbiased viewpoint. And 2, it helps you decide whether or not these are things you need to validate through research. For example, let's imagine we're working for Airbnb and we're working on a new feature that helps people plan trips with others using Airbnb. One of our assumptions might be that we believe people expect to be able to split the payments with others using Airbnb. By listing this out, this helps us evaluate whether or not we need to do research on a specific problem. In our experience, most things that end up in this category on a given project don't end up getting researched. That's what the next step and section is for. Which leads us to step 5. List out all of the questions you need to answer to properly solve the problem. What don't you know about the problem? What do you need to learn to be able to move forward? This step is important because these questions form the basis for your research. You'll need to answer all these questions to effectively design the solution to the problem. For example, using the same Airbnb example about planning trips with others. Maybe you're uncertain whether people would actually communicate with Airbnb, or if they'd use outside communication methods like email or text. That would become a question that we need to answer through research. Answering that question would help you figure out whether or not you have to build an internal chat tool specifically for communicating with people to plan a trip. The final step is to list out all the constraints that are associated with the project. For example, these could be tight project deadlines or a lack of staffing resources to accomplish the feature. In your case, your constraints could be the fact that you're working on your own and don't have a team or funding to complete the project. And that's it. Sometimes the insights you gain from your research will indicate that you actually framed the wrong problem. At this point, you'll come back to the document and rewrite it to reflect the problem that you are now trying to solve. In other words, framing the problem is a living document that might change along the way as you gain a deeper understanding of the user. To recap, framing the problem is a document created at the beginning of a project to define exactly what you're trying to solve. It has 6 steps starting from defining the problem to listing out constraints. Now it's your turn to frame the problem. Go to the Framing the Problem tab in the Figma workbook and use the worksheet to frame the problem. You'll see a transparent frame in Figma that has our answers to framing the problem. We recommend that you don't look at it until you've done it yourself. Then when you finish doing it on your own, you can go and see how your work compares. Happy framing!
Conducting user interviews is an essential part of the UX process, but it's one of the trickiest methods to master. In this video, we're going to talk about how to successfully conduct user interviews. So buckle up because it's going to be an intense, in-depth ride. We'll cover what user interviews are and why they're important, when to conduct them, how to prepare for them, how to conduct user interviews, the do's and don'ts of user interviews, the drawbacks of user interviews, and what to do after you finish conducting them. By the end of this lesson, you'll have everything you need to plan and run user interviews. As always, before we begin, and so you can follow along, go download our course materials at kickassux.com under our free UX course page. Now that that's out of the way, let's get after it. There have been times in our careers where we were absolutely certain that users of our product had specific beliefs and behaviors. It was only after we interviewed them that we realized we had it wrong and that they believed something else entirely. Had we continued blindly with our assumptions, we would have designed the wrong thing. Instead, we learned what we needed to design by talking directly to users. So with that, let's talk about what user interviews are and why they're important. A user interview is a one-on-one conversation between a UX researcher, aka you in this case, and a participant. To conduct a user interview, you write a script with your research questions, and then you use that script to talk to participants. That's it. It's one of the cheapest, simplest, and most common methods employed in user research. User interviews help you gain an understanding of your users, who they are, their goals, what they like about the product, what they want from your product, their pain points with the product, and many, many other things. Basically, users will tell you their opinions and perceptions of an experience. User interviews can range from 15 minutes to an hour and a half. Most interviews we conduct, though, are around 15 to 45 minutes. One of the best parts of user interviews is that you don't need to conduct them with dozens and dozens of participants to get statistically significant answers. Usually, you only need to talk to 4 to 6 participants who represent your audience to see trends and gain insights. The structure of a user interview has 3 sections: the introduction, the interview questions, and the wrap-up. The introduction is a pre-written script that you read to each participant to frame the purpose of the interview and set expectations for the session. Then comes the questions, where you ask the participants everything you need to know. This is the meat of the interview. And the wrap-up is the script where you read closing remarks to the participant and ask if they have any questions for you. User interviews are important because they give you insights into the needs and deep motivators of your users. They help you better understand people's behaviors and their choices. They also help validate assumptions, answer research questions, and give you empathy for the user. Conducting user interviews directly helps you figure out the design direction. It's fair to say that without them, creating user-centered designs can be like you're shooting in the dark. We've covered what user interviews are, Let's now talk about when to conduct them. User interviews can be conducted during any stage of the UX process. That said, they're usually most effective in the beginning stages when you're still defining the problem and figuring out the general design direction. This way, it's still cheap and easy to change your approach based on user feedback. User interviews are also used during the middle stages of the process or after usability testing to gather users' opinions about an existing product or design. It's best to conduct user interviews in the beginning of your process if possible. This way, you can uncover insights and validate your assumptions upfront before you sink too much time into going in the wrong direction. Now, let's cover how to prepare for user interviews. There are 5 primary things to do. Define interview goals, create your interview questions and work them into the script/discussion guide, test your equipment, recruit participants, and conduct a dry run. First, before diving into interviews, you need to have a solid reason for doing it. You shouldn't be doing them just because you think you ought to. That's a waste of time and shows that you don't know how to critically approach the problem. Truly think about why you're going to conduct user interviews. What are you hoping to learn? These are your interview goals. Normally, you'd meet with stakeholders to identify what you need to learn together. Many times, the reason you decide to conduct user interviews is to validate the problem you've identified during framing the problem. You also conduct user interviews to answer any questions that came up during framing the problem. That said, there could be many reasons for running user interviews, so make sure to fully define your interview goals before starting. Next, create your interview questions and add them to a script. We added a sample user interview script that you can download directly from our Figma workbook. So, if you haven't already, make sure to download it from our site at kickassux.com under our free UX course page. Coming back around, if you framed the problem, you already have all the research questions in one place. So now you just need to format them to fit your interviews. With that in mind, what's the first rule of user interviews? Don't ask closed questions. What's the second rule of user interview questions? Don't ask closed questions. A closed question is a question where the only answers are yes or no. The participant has no room to elaborate or tell you how they really feel. For example, let's say you worked for Alaska Airlines and wanted to understand if people felt comfortable purchasing flights on their mobile app. A closed question would be something like, would you purchase an airline ticket on your mobile app? The only answers are yes or no. Don't do this. Instead, ask open questions. Open questions invite a greater response than just a yes or no answer. They allow the user to fully explain their thoughts and opinions. They also help you get to the reason behind why someone does something. With that in mind, a better way to ask the question would be something like, can you tell me your thoughts about using your mobile phone to order airline tickets? Also, make sure to avoid leading questions. Leading questions bias the participant towards a certain answer, which will skew the results of your interviews. Using the same Alaska Airlines example, a leading question could be, which apps do you use to purchase airline tickets? This question assumes that they use mobile apps to purchase airline tickets and directs their focus only towards the mobile space rather than more broadly. Again, don't do this. Instead, ask non-leading questions. These don't push the participant towards a specific response. A better way to ask that question would be, how do you currently purchase airline travel? In general, ask questions that are open and non-leading, meaning they invite a greater response than just a yes or no, and don't bias their answer. Before moving to the next thing, here are a few last tips for creating your interview questions. Tip number 1, if possible, create more questions than you'll have time for. This ensures that you'll have something to talk about if the interview goes quickly. Tip number 2, with that previous tip in mind, ask the most important questions first, just in case you run out of time. And the final tip, have follow-up questions or phrases prepared after your questions. Moving on, the third thing left to do is test your equipment. This can't be stated enough. It's super frustrating to show up to a user interview only to find out that you're having technical difficulties. Not only does it make your job harder and waste valuable time, it also doesn't make you look very professional to the participant, and they're less likely to provide insightful responses. You don't need fancy microphones, cameras, or screen recorders to get the job done. What you already have on your computer and phone should be enough. Just be prepared for the environment you're recording in. After testing your equipment, it'll be time to start recruiting. In an ideal world, you'd already have started recruiting before any of this because recruiting takes time. But when you're first starting out, being confident in your process and what you've created is really important. That's why we waited to talk about recruiting until now. Finding the right participants is critical for gaining valuable insights and results from research. Unfortunately, it can be challenging to recruit the right people to participate in your research. There are a few reasons for that. First, there are just many people who don't have the time. Second, people you recruit need to represent the users of your product. If they don't represent your users, then your results won't provide you with the actionable insights to truly solve the user's needs. With that in mind, it's important to build criteria of who to recruit for your research. The attributes of the people you're recruiting can be broad or highly specific depending on what you're looking to learn. Here are a few general rules to keep in mind for your criteria. First, don't recruit people you know personally. Their responses can be biased just because they know you, but in a pinch, they can work. If you know someone who uses your product and you can't find anyone else that you don't know, you can bend that rule. Second, as much as possible, recruit people who represent your users or potential users. List the attributes of the people you want to get feedback from. Are they current users? Are they new users? Have they ever used your product? Do they use a product like yours? How tech savvy are they? Etc. Building successful recruiting criteria can be tricky. If you define the criteria too broadly, you might end up with people who don't really represent your users. If you're too specific, you might accidentally weed out good candidates and not be able to find people to participate. Try building criteria that are the right balance between broad and specific. Research criteria include two categories: mandatory and optional. Mandatory means that the person fits every single item listed. With that in mind, list everything you know that needs to be true about the people you're going to interview. You don't want anyone who doesn't fit all of the mandatory criteria. For example, imagine you were working on a discount app for supermarkets. Here are a few things that could be part of the mandatory criteria. These participants must go to the supermarket at least once a month, and they must shop at general supermarkets like Safeway, Fred Meyer, Kroger, Trader Joe's, H-E-B, Albertsons, Walmart, Target, etc. Optional criteria include other attributes that might be true of your target audience. These are assumptions and might not matter to people who use the discount supermarket app. It's good to include some of the questions from the optional criteria at the beginning of an interview so you can learn more about the target audience, what they prefer, and what their actions look like. Back to the supermarket discount app as an example, here are a few things that could be part of the optional criteria. These participants don't shop at Whole Foods. Those who shop at Whole Foods are typically willing to pay full price and then some. That means they're probably less likely to use a discount shopping app. These people also currently use coupons when they go shopping, and they use apps like Groupon or Living Social. Next, create your screener by turning your criteria into questions. A screener is a list of questions that help you identify your target audience and weed out those who don't fit your criteria. Getting back to the supermarket discount app as an example, here's what our screener could look like. Do you shop at a supermarket? If no, end the interview. How often do you shop at the supermarket each month? If zero, end the interview. That's it. These two questions came from the mandatory criteria and will eliminate people who do not fit in the target audience. In this same example, it's also good to include some of the optional criteria as well, just to learn more about the audience. This might look like, which supermarkets do you shop at most often? Do you use coupons when you shop? If yes, how often? Do you use apps like Groupon or Living Social? There are a few ways you can actively use your screener to weed people out of your research. First, if you're reaching out to potential participants through email, social media, or your own network, you can build your screener into your message. With the supermarket app example, you might put out something on your social media accounts saying something like, "I'm conducting research about a new supermarket app that helps you find the cheapest prices on products." If you shop at supermarkets like Safeway, Kroger, Fred Meyer, Walmart, or Target at least once a month, I would love to talk with you. Second, you can use a screener in real time when you talk directly to someone during an interview or test. You can do this at the beginning of your session. If they don't pass your screener, you politely let them know that they don't fit the parameters of your test. Thank them for their time and send them on their way. The last way to use your screener is during a remote survey or usability test. The screener would be at the beginning, and depending on the responses, the software would then either let them proceed or it would send them to an exit page where it tells them they didn't fit the criteria. As a side note, in order to do this, your survey or usability testing tool would need to have a screening feature or conditional logic built into its functionality. Now, let's talk about the different ways you can find your participants. We'll break these down into two categories. First, we'll cover the free or inexpensive methods. Second, we'll show you the other ways you might recruit participants when employed as a UX designer when you have a bigger budget. Let's start with the first category, free or inexpensive methods. First is your own network. Think about your friends, family, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, etc. Use whatever works to find people who fit your criteria. Second would be using services such as Amazon Mechanical Turk. The advantage is that you'll interview people you don't know, which means you're less likely to bias participants. While you do have to pay for Amazon Mechanical Turk, this is a fast and cheap way to get great results. For example, you can easily get 20 survey results that require about 1 to 2 minutes to complete for a total of $3 to $6. Or you can complete 5 15-minute interviews for a total of $10 to $15. Within Amazon Mechanical Turk, you can create screeners and target specific demographics to ensure that you're attracting the right type of user. The third inexpensive/free method, snowball recruiting. This means at the end of a user interview or usability test, you ask if they know anyone else who would like to participate. Last in the cheap/inexpensive category, guerrilla recruiting. This is where you go to a coffee shop or store and ask people to participate in a 5 to 15-minute conversation or test. You usually offer an incentive like a $5 gift card to Starbucks. There are 3 main downsides of guerrilla testing. 1, it takes some practice and confidence to approach people in the wild. 2, you might end up standing around and waiting for people to show up. 3, you might not end up with people who fit your criteria because you can't be too picky about who agrees to talk to you. Now let's talk about methods that require a larger budget. First, online ads. You can put out ads online through whatever ad medium you'd like to use. This usually works best for surveys. Using platforms like Facebook allows you to be hyper-targeted with who you recruit, but you risk paying for people who click your ad and don't actually sign up. Depending on the ad platform you use, you might end up with people who don't represent your user. Second, you can choose a research participant recruitment agency. This is a really efficient way to recruit people, but it also costs a lot to do. This last method is one of our favorites because of how easy it is, but it really only applies when you're employed as a UX designer. Basically, you work with someone on your team, typically from marketing, support, or sales, to get emails of people who are using the product. You then reach out to them directly to sign up for research. You can also work with someone from marketing to send out a blast email to the entire list to ask for participants. Next, let's talk about gaining participants' consent for research. This is actually a lot easier than it sounds. All you have to do is get them to sign a consent form, which is a document that says they agree to participate in the study. This protects you and eventually the company you work for from someone who thinks they deserve credit or financial compensation above and beyond any incentives you provide for their help in your study. We recommend looking up research consent forms on Google and copying one for your own use. Now that we've talked through the different ways to find participants and gaining their consent, let's talk about incentives. Incentives are just what they sound like. They are a form of reward or financial compensation to entice people to participate. The size of a reward usually depends on the method you use as well as the amount of time the research takes. If you're conducting 5 guerrilla tests at a coffee shop that each last 15 minutes, we recommend providing an incentive of $5 to $10 per test. That works out to around $25 to $50 in total. If you're conducting your interviews using Amazon Mechanical Turk, those same 5 interviews that require 15 minutes to complete would only cost you anywhere between $10 to $15 in total. That's $2 to $3 per test. That said, you can start by providing no incentives at all and see if people agree to participate. When you are employed as a UX designer, it's not unheard of to provide somewhere between $50 to $200 to someone, depending on the amount of time it takes and the complexity of the research. It's important to point out that there are other things you can provide in return for someone's help other than just straight cash. You just have to ask yourself, what can I offer that would make it worth that person's time? So if you're on your own or working for a company without a budget, you can still offer incentives, you'll just have to be creative. And there are plenty of folks who are just willing to help for free. All in all, when it comes to recruiting, use whatever works best for you to find the right people to talk to. Just do your best to find at least 4 to 6 participants. Once you've added your interview questions to the script, tested your equipment, and recruited your participants, finally, you'll conduct a dry run with a friend or family member. This will help you practice your delivery and smooth out any of the kinks in the script and questions. Do everything like you would for a real interview. This means that you'd start by reading the introduction script, recording the session, and asking them all of your questions, even if you already know their answers. This will help you get a sense of how long it takes, if everything is worded correctly, and how it flows. If you're running remote sessions, now's a great time to make sure that you won't have any technical difficulties. After your script is ready and your participants are recruited, all you have left to do is run each user interview. So let's talk about how to run one for yourself. Remember, each user interview has 3 parts: the introduction, the questions, and the wrap-up. With this in mind, the first thing you do is read out the introduction script to the participant. It's the exact same intro for each participant, which helps eliminate biases because you begin the session the same way every time. The introduction script does 6 things. First, It sets the participants' expectations for the session and helps them get comfortable talking with you. Second, it informs them why you're conducting the interview. Third, it tells them to only share their opinions, not what they feel others believe. Fourth, it assures them that there are no right or wrong answers and that you're not testing their knowledge. This is so important because it helps them express their opinions without feeling like their intelligence is being questioned. Fifth, it frees them up to be as honest as possible. Sixth, it gives their permission to record the session and assures them that the recording will only be used internally for your notes and nothing more. After the introduction, you'll start asking the interview questions. Ask each question one by one and take notes on their responses. Don't be too focused on your notes though, or you might miss something. You'll always have the recording you can analyze later. Also, don't be afraid to go off script. Many times your participants will dig into a topic that you didn't account for. That's awesome. Take advantage of it. You can prompt the user to tell you more by asking, "Can you tell me a bit more about that?" Or even just, "Why?" You'll be surprised how much you can learn from doing that. Finally, after your questions, you'll wrap up the session by asking them if they have any questions for you and thanking them for their time. Now, let's cover some do's and don'ts of user interviews. Do ask to record the session and let them know how you're going to use that information. Don't assume that it's okay just to record someone. That can become a serious legal problem. Do focus on the participants. Don't focus on note-taking. You'll always have the recording to go back to. We highly recommend using a service like Dovetail to transcribe and analyze your results. You can find a link in the description for Dovetail. Do ask seemingly simple questions. Don't make assumptions. Sometimes you'll assume that you shouldn't ask a basic question because you think you know the answer. However, you don't truly know the answer, so ask the question. Do make your participants feel comfortable. It's always a good idea to start out interviews asking open-ended questions about them to get them warmed up and comfortable talking with you. Be okay with silence. This can be hard for some folks, but this is crucial. Doing this gives the user space to say what they want without being interrupted. Additionally, periods of silence put pressure on them to pipe up. Some of the best research findings come from a few seconds of silent reflection from the participant. Don't try to fill in the silence. Just ask your question and listen. Do keep an eye on the clock to make sure you don't run over the session time. Don't continue over time without getting their permission first. Continuing past the agreed upon time is poor form. It shows a lack of respect for the participant's time. For interviews using Amazon Mechanical Turk, avoid going over at all costs. Be neutral. Don't provide expressions or mannerisms that the participant can react to. You can bias the participant by not doing this properly. They can change how they respond based on how you're acting, so be friendly, but be as neutral as possible. Be open, be curious. Show that you're genuinely interested in what they're saying. Remember, you're learning from them. You're the student, they're the teacher. Don't act like their responses aren't interesting. If participants feel like you're bored with their answers, they'll stop talking. If someone tells you something interesting that isn't in the script, go with the flow. You might find some hidden gems. Moving on, let's talk about some drawbacks of user interviews. First, people tend to say they'll do one thing when they'll actually do another. This comes back to what we talked about in the Intro to Research and Understanding video with attitudinal versus behavioral research. User interviews are inherently attitudinal, what they say they'll do, as we don't observe them behave the way they would when they're actually using our product without us around. This can potentially skew our results. For example, let's say you're interviewing users about a dieting app. They might say they'd love to use it, but in actuality, they'd rather sit on the couch with a pizza and wouldn't download your app in the first place. This can sometimes give you false positives. Second, your interview will only be as good as your participant's memory. There's a good chance that your participant won't remember everything about what you ask them. This means that you'll get incomplete data and not get all the details you are looking for. Plus, when it comes to biases, people might try to fill in their memory gaps with information, even if it's not true, because they don't want to disappoint you or come across like they're not smart. Research biases are definitely a thing, and you'll see them play out here. Third, you might hear a bunch of noise. There's a good chance that your users will ask for random product features. Many times, that's just noise. However, if you hear the same thing from multiple people, then the request might be worth looking into. Fourth, interviews aren't the best platform for asking users if they want a specific piece of functionality. Most users will tell you, yes, I want that shiny new thing, even if they won't use it or if it's not that helpful. They think they want it, attitudinal, but in reality, they won't actually use it, behavioral. Finally, let's talk about what to do when you finish conducting a user interview with a participant. There's a section below our user interview script template that's called the top 5 takeaways in our Figma workbook. Right after each interview, we recommend going to that section and writing down what you believe to be the most important insights you learned during that interview. You'll also want to pull out direct quotes from your interviews that provide those insights. Repeat this for each user interview you conduct. At the end, you should have 4 to 6 user interviews completed. And that's it for this video. I know we've covered a lot, we've come a long way, so here's the recap. A user interview is a one-on-one conversation between a UX researcher and a participant that provides insights into the needs and deep motivators of users. Interviews can range from 15 minutes to an hour and a half, and we recommend aiming for 15 to 45-minute sessions. You only need to conduct user interviews with 4 to 6 participants to gain insights. To effectively prepare for user interviews, you need to define your interview goals, create your interview questions, build your script and discussion guide, test your equipment, recruit participants, and conduct a dry run. We reviewed do's and don'ts, such as being okay with silence, and once you're done with an interview, write out your top 5 takeaways from the interview. In the future, when you're employed as a UX designer, ask other stakeholders to listen into interviews you conduct. It'll help the entire team get on the same page and gain empathy for users. Plus, it's really awesome when other teammates are taking notes so you all can compare your insights. So now it's time for the course assignment. When you open up the Figma workbook and go to the User Interviews tab, you'll notice that we did all of the hard work for you and already conducted 5 user interviews. So now, all you have to do is read through all the 5 transcripts. Then, below each transcript, write down your top 5 most important takeaways from each interview, as well as other notes and observations. Below the first 2 participants' takeaways, you'll notice that we have 2 transparent screens that show you our takeaways from each interview. We recommend you don't look at them until you've done it for yourself. Then, when you finish doing it on your own, you can go and see how your work compares. You got this.
Hey, what's up, Kick-Ass fam? So, after conducting 4 to 6 user interviews, you now have a ton of data. You have pages and pages of transcripts. While this is great, you might feel overwhelmed by the quantity of data. So how are you going to organize it all? How are you going to make sense of it? By conducting an affinity map. By the way, after this lesson, you will complete your own affinity map in the Figma workbook. Alright, let's get started. We're going to talk about how to synthesize the information from the user interviews using an affinity diagram. We're going to cover what an affinity diagram is and why it's important, how to create one for yourself, and a few tips about affinity diagrams. Let's get to it. Let's first start with what an affinity diagram is and why it's important. We've all seen movies in which detectives use boards to link suspects and incidents. Those boards are such a great way to connect the dots. In UX, affinity diagrams do just that. Affinity diagramming is a visual method you use to group chunks of data into meaningful insights. You do this by writing pieces of research data down on sticky notes and then grouping them with similar pieces of information with which they have an affinity. Affinity diagrams help you understand large sets of data and visualize the relationship between different groups. So for example, let's say you just conducted 6 user interviews. You'll have pages and pages of notes that are not truly valuable until you break the information piece by piece. You make meaning out of these pieces by grouping similar data into categories to see broad user trends. And that's an affinity diagram in a nutshell. Now that you have a general understanding of what an affinity diagram is, let's talk about how to create one for yourself. Write down all the qualitative data and direct quotes from your research onto sticky notes. If you wish, you can forego using pen and paper and do this on your computer using software like Figma, Mural, or Miro. After you've written all your sticky notes out, either physically or digitally, start by grabbing a random sticky note and putting it on the wall. Then grab another sticky note and ask yourself, is this sticky note like the one I just put on the wall? Or is it different? If it's similar to the first sticky, group it with the first. Otherwise, place it into a new group. Then keep repeating by adding sticky notes to new or existing groups. Expect to change your mind and rearrange sticky notes several times based on affinities. It's important to point out that there is no right or wrong to affinity diagramming. Our analytical minds want to be right. Someone else could see the same data and come up with completely different groupings. Let the data speak for itself. After you're done grouping everything, grab a different sticky note color and give each group a name that accurately describes what the group is all about. You can then rank your group by most important to least important based on what you've heard from user feedback. The goal of this entire activity is to categorize all of the stickies into groups, so you can make sense of the large amount of data by identifying patterns. Then start categorizing the sticky notes into groups. Again, don't be afraid to move sticky notes from group to group if you change your mind. Once you're done grouping all the sticky notes, add labels to each group. Boom, you've created an affinity diagram. You now have most of your insights from your research in one place. Finally, here are a few tips about affinity diagrams. Be innocent and curious. Act like this is the first time you're seeing this information. Resist the temptation to assign group names too early. Your preconceived notions will diminish your insights. You'll miss the true relationship between data points. Expect to move stickies multiple times to different groups. Depending on the lens you look through, a sticky note might have an affinity with one group or another. If you find a sticky note has equal affinity with multiple groups, create duplicates to put one in each group. Don't worry about the amount of data you have. Seemingly too much or too little. This exercise will help you gain valuable insight into the data, no matter how many data points you have. If you do have a ton of data, this is great. This is the best way to break it down into understandable chunks. Just take it one sticky at a time. If you're doing this physically, choose a surface that allows you to use all your sticky notes. You don't want to be restricted by space. Include a small tag on each sticky note that includes the name of the person or other identifying piece of information of where you got that data. This way you can see the similarities in the demographics between all the data points. Just make sure not to group your stickies based on that alone. To recap, affinity diagrams are a visual method you use to group chunks of data into meaningful insights. They allow you to understand large sets of data by visualizing the relationships between groups of information. We also talked about how to create affinity diagrams. And finally, we went over a few tips to build the most insightful affinity diagrams. Once you're hired as a UX designer, you will create affinity diagrams with people on your team, like the product manager or UX researcher. Doing this in a group helps you bring additional perspectives to the table, ensuring that the final groupings are well thought out. When you conduct this with a team, the process of grouping stickies should be silent. Doing this silently levels the playing field as no one can dominate the discussion. You get a better result and it takes less time. Alright, now it's your turn. Go complete the affinity map in the Figma workbook. If you don't have your workbook yet, go download it at kickassux.com under the free UX course page. Happy mapping!
Humans today have the shortest attention span in the history of the world. The amount of stimuli that we are confronted with has grown so much that building simple user experiences has become more crucial than ever before. People don't have patience for bad UX. This means that we as UX designers have to be able to simplify information down to the essentials. And that's where information architecture comes in. In this video, we're going to give you an overview of information architecture, otherwise known as IA. We'll talk about the difference between IA and UX, and go over the 4 components of IA. But before we dive in, and just so you can follow along, once again, we encourage you to download our course materials at kickassux.com under our free UX course page. The link is in the description. Now that that's out of the way, let's get after it. So let's start with an overview of IA. Information architecture is the organization and structure of content and information. The goal of IA is to help people understand what they see, find what they need, and complete tasks. Information architecture connects people to the content they're looking for. Look at it this way. If you wanted to build a house, you call an architect who would create the layout and blueprint. If you wanted to build a website or an application, you call an information architect who would create the layout and blueprint for your app. Information architects create order from chaos. They build systems and structures to organize complex sets of data so people can find what they're looking for. It's all about clearly and logically organizing information. Here's an example of information architecture in the real world. Almost all grocery stores are organized in the exact same way, regardless of the store brand or where the store is located. This is because they use the same information principles and layout. That way, regardless of what store you're in, you feel comfortable and generally know where to find things. For example, you know that you can find milk in the dairy section, which is usually located at the back of the store. Just like you also know that ketchup is located in the condiment aisle. Could you imagine a store where everything was organized alphabetically? Ketchup would be located next to Kellogg's cereal, ham would be next to Hammers, it just wouldn't make sense. At this point, you may be wondering, isn't information architecture the same thing as UX? The quick and dirty answer is no, they're not the same thing. Let's dig into that a bit more by talking about the difference between IA and UX. Remember the definition of UX? It's the process of making a product or service useful, relevant, and meaningful for people. By comparison, IA is the organization and structure of content and information with the goal of helping people understand what they see, find what they need, and complete tasks. When you see those two definitions side by side, you can see that IA is one of the pieces that make up UX. After all, how could you make a product useful, relevant, and meaningful if no one could make sense of what they're seeing and find what they actually needed? Like we talked about in the Intro to UX video, as a UX generalist, you also need to be a competent information architect. You are in charge of organizing information on screen in a way that is useful, findable, and helps users complete tasks in the simplest way possible. Now that you have a basic understanding of information architecture, let's talk about the four main components of IA: labeling, organization, navigation, and search. As an easy way to remember it, don't forget to mow your lawns of information. First, let's talk about labeling systems, or how you represent information. Labels and titles help people figure out whether or not the page, content, link, button, etc. will have the information they're looking for. Using the grocery store example, products like deodorant, shampoo, and hand soap can be found under the label of personal hygiene, just like Blu-ray discs, TVs, and gaming consoles can be found under the label of electronics. As a grocery store shopper, you don't expect to find Jell-O in the frozen food aisle. That's because the label doesn't match up with how the product has been categorized. People quickly scan labels before reading anything else to figure out if they're in the right place and if it's worth their time. It's best to choose labels that are universally understood and familiar to users. Make sure these labels reflect the user's perspective, not yours. Do your best to avoid using unfamiliar words or words just to make your content seem more interesting. Use what's familiar. Next, there's organization. There are two parts to organization: schemes and structures. Let's start with schemes. And no, we're not talking about pyramid schemes or the idiotic schemes of Wile E. Coyote trying to kill the Roadrunner. No, we're talking about how you categorize content and how you establish relationships between pieces of information. Before we go further, there's a fundamental term to understand when it comes to organization schemes, and that's taxonomy. Taxonomy seems like a scary word because no one likes taxes, but that's not what it is at all. Taxonomy is the classification and grouping of information within a shared information environment. Put more simply, taxonomy is how you name and group similar things into categories. It's how you know that an orange is different than an apple, and that a Crips Pink apple is a different type of apple than a Fuji apple, even though they might look similar. Let's take a step back and look at taxonomy as one of the pieces that make up IA. If information architecture is the housing blueprint, then taxonomy is the plan for each individual room. The kitchen would only contain items that belong in the kitchen, each bedroom would only have stuff that belongs in the bedrooms, and so on. It's the grouping of things within the same environment. There are many ways to create a cohesive taxonomy. Doing so requires you to understand the needs of your users, the context they're in, and the content you're providing them. What users are looking for needs to make sense in the context of where they're looking for it. Now that you have a basic understanding of taxonomy, you can use that information to determine what scheme to use in your design. A scheme is a method by which you choose to categorize your content. There are exact schemes like alphabetical, organized by alphabet. Think about the contact list in your mobile phone. Chronological, organized by date. Think calendars. Geographical, organized by location. Think Google Maps or Airbnb. And there are subjective schemes like topic, organized based on the subject of the content. Task, organized by determining the actions and needs of the users when they come to that content. Audience, organized for the different types of people who will be accessing that content. And metaphor, content organized by relating familiar concepts such as folders, applications, and trash like you see in all computers. Great. Now we've covered the first half of organization. Now on to the second half, structures. Organizational structures establish how pieces of information are related to one another. A good structure allows users to easily find the content they're looking for on a site. There are three main organization structures: hierarchical, sequential, and matrix. Let's first tackle hierarchical structures, and holy hell, that's a mouthful. These are also known as tree structures because there's a parent-child relationship between the pieces of information. They start with the bigger categories, parent, and then narrow down into the more detailed pieces of content, children. For example, Apple's website is organized hierarchically. It starts off with all of their main product lines listed at the top. If you click on any of them, you'll see all the submodels related to that category. Next, there are sequential structures, where you go step by step until you reach an outcome. Think of when you set up your smartphone. You had to go through a setup wizard that asked you a bunch of questions in a specific order before you could actually start using your phone. Another example is this course. You follow each lesson step by step before you can move on to the next lesson. Each lesson builds on the last until you finish the course and you've developed your UX chops. Finally, you have a matrix structure. This allows you to figure out your own path since content is linked in many different ways. Think Wikipedia. You can find something by searching for it, by reading about it on another article, or in a multitude of other ways. The structure of a website is incredibly important. It has long-term implications of how things will be organized, especially as new features roll out. If you're designing something from scratch, you need to make sure that the structure you choose allows for additions in the future. At this point, we've covered the low and lawns. Let's move on to the NS. And if you like dance, feeling a little self-conscious on that one. Next up is navigation. Navigation is all about how people move through and find content. When considering navigation, ask yourself, how do people move throughout your product to find the information they're looking for? There are many types of navigation, including global and local navigation, menus, breadcrumbs, filters, links, and so on. These elements help your users find the information they're looking for. Finally, we have search. This is exactly what it sounds like. It gives your users the ability to find the information they need. Search is helpful only if a website has enough content. If there is a ton of information, then search can help narrow things down. It just needs to be displayed in such a way that is useful and not overwhelming. To recap, information architecture is the organization and structure of content and information. The goal of IA is to help people understand what they see, find what they need, and complete tasks. Information architecture connects people to the content they're looking for. IA is only part of UX. It provides the bones, structure, and organization of information. And finally, the four components of IA are labeling, organization, which consists of schemes and structures, navigation, and search. And as a good reminder, don't forget to mow your lawns of information. The field of information architecture is vast and complex, which is why there are people who specialize just in IA or a subspecialty of IA, such as search schemas or taxonomy. At this point, you now have an idea of what information architecture is. While this knowledge may be basic now, the more you exercise your UX muscles, the greater your knowledge of IA will become.
Hey, what's up, Kick-Ass fam? So, digital interfaces are not new. They've been around for a while. And that's why there is no need to complexify your solutions or to reinvent the wheel. Instead, we'll show you how to fast-track your design process by going over 27 industry standard UI elements. First are primary buttons. In general, all buttons indicate an action that will happen upon clicking or tapping it. The primary button is the most visible and important button on the page. It guides users to complete an important action. By definition, there should only be one primary button per page. Primary buttons usually have solid, bold colors as the background. Let's look at 3 examples of primary buttons. First is Facebook. When you make a status update, the most important action is to post, which is reflected in the primary button. Second is Google Docs. After creating a doc, One of the most critical actions that Google wants you to take for product adoption purposes is to share the document. That's why the primary button is Share, located in the top right corner. And third is Gmail. When composing an email, sending is the final action you will take. That's why the primary button is Send, located in the bottom left corner of the email window. In all these scenarios, there is only one primary button present. This helps to draw your attention to it and promote its importance. There is one more thing to point out here. Just because there might be only one button on a screen, doesn't mean that button should be a primary action. Next, there are secondary buttons. These are used for less important actions that are not as visually emphasized as the primary button. While it's not always the case, it's common for a secondary button to be placed next to the primary button. When placed next to a primary button, secondary buttons are usually the opposite action. For example, Send and Cancel. Here are two examples of secondary buttons. First, there is Audible. The secondary button, Cancel, is placed just below the primary button, Confirm Purchase. The next example is Dropbox. When you create a folder, a modal pops up asking you to name the folder and choose a location. At the bottom, the only two options are Create, which is your primary button, and Cancel, which is the secondary button. Third are tertiary buttons. Every company uses this button style differently. These are used when an action is not necessary, but the user still might want to take action, like adding a description or photo or bookmarking something. Typically, these are considerably less prominent than the primary button, and depending on the product, can be more or less visible than the secondary button. Remember, you can only have one primary button on screen. That's where tertiary buttons come in. They are perfect for instances where there are repetitive actions. Let's look at some examples of tertiary buttons. First, on Airbnb, there are additional actions you might take. For example, more about the location, or contacting the hosts before choosing the primary action of reserving the place, located in the top right corner. Notice how it's the only primary action on the page? Another example is Google Calendar. When you click anywhere on the calendar, it automatically starts to create an event for you. The primary action here is to save the event. However, you can choose to take the tertiary action of more options in case you're looking to add more to the invite. Unfortunately, Google broke a fundamental rule here by adding more than one primary button to the screen. One for adding video conferencing and one for saving. Fourth are toggles, also called toggle switches, toggle buttons, or toggle icons. Think of toggle like a light switch. They turn something on and off. For example, you can toggle the Wi-Fi on and off on your phone. Doing so will instantly change the state without having to press save for it to be activated. Same thing goes for airplane mode. Another example is TikTok. Clicking on follow toggles following or unfollowing the respective profile. Fifth are segmented controls, also known as button groups. They provide contextual control over a specific element and are basically a crossover between tertiary buttons, toggles, and tabs. For example, on Google Doc, if you want to align the text, you would use the segmented control that toggles between left, center, and right aligned or justified. Another example is the Health app on iOS. In this instance, the segmented control allows you to switch the view using different time frames, like day, week, month, etc. Sixth are icons. Icons are simplified vectors or flat images that are used in most apps. They are a hybrid case because they can act as buttons, toggles, navigation, and as a helpful image. For example, in Google Drive, all of the icons in the left panel act as tabs, changing what you see on the right side of the screen when you click on them. Clicking on Trash, for example, shows you all the items in the trash, and so on. Or notice the search icon in the search bar. All this is really straightforward. Seventh are checkboxes. These allow users to make one or more selections from a list of options. Typically, these are displayed vertically to keep it obvious what is available to select. For example, here are checkboxes being used for filtering in Amazon. By checking a box in the left panel, it filters your Amazon search results. Another example is Google Forms. Here are checkboxes being used in one of the fields you have to answer to complete the form. You can find checkboxes in almost every product online. They're most commonly found in online forms and settings pages. 8th, a radio button. Unlike checkboxes, which allow users to select one or more options in a list, radio buttons only allow a single selection from a list of options. For example, here is a Google form that asked what age group users are in. Radio buttons are used for this question because there can only be one answer. Another example is Facebook settings. Here, they use radio buttons to show that you can only make one choice for how you choose to receive notifications when tagged. Just like checkboxes, you can find radio buttons in almost every online product. 9th, a drop-down list or menus. Clicking a drop-down presents a list to make a selection from. They can either allow single or multiple selections depending on the type of drop-down. Drop-downs are great for situations when you can't use radio buttons or checkboxes because there are too many options. A rule of thumb is to use a drop-down menu when there are more than 3 to 4 fields to choose from. For example, here are 2 drop-downs. The one on the left is for Amazon and is used to help you filter your past orders. The one on the right can be found in Google Calendar. It helps to set the meeting visibility. 10th, a text fields. As their name indicates, they enable users to enter text. Text fields can either contain single or multiple lines of text. These are used in every application and product online. For example, here are 4 different text fields being used in Google Calendar. At the top, it's a single line text field for the title of the event. Then there are 2 single line autocomplete text fields, one for searching for the location of the event, and one for inviting guests. Finally, there is a multi-line text box that allows you to add a description to your event. 11th, are date pickers. They are just like what they sound. They allow users to pick a date and/or time. For example, here is a date picker used on Airbnb. It allows you to seamlessly choose a start and end date for your trip. And here is an example of a date picker from Apple Reminders on the iPhone. 12th, are search fields. They give users the ability to search for content using keywords or phrases. The most famous search field in the world is probably Google Search. Another example of search is on Airbnb. Here you search for location you'd like to stay at a specific time with a certain number of people. 13th, are pages or pagination. These are just like pages in a book, but are separated digitally and connected by buttons or links. Think Google Search again. When you get to the bottom of the page, you're presented with page numbers. You need to press next to go to the following page of information and so on. 14th, are tabs. These controls are most commonly placed at the top of the page and change all of the content beneath them. For example, when you conduct a Google search, you will see a series of tabs like All, Maps, News, Images, Videos, and more. If you search for Paris, France, under the All tab, you will see links to various sites you can navigate to. If you switch to the Images tab, you will see related images still based on Paris, France. Another example of tabs is Google Drive. These tabs are located in the left panel. Clicking them changes the content in the main area. 15th, are sliders. Sliders allow users to set a specific value or range of values. For example, if you search for a flight on Google Flights, you can set the max price that you want to spend on your airplane tickets by dragging the slider to the highest price you're willing to pay. An example of a slider that allows you to select a range of values is from Airbnb. Here, you can set the minimum and maximum price range you're willing to pay for your trip. 16th, are tags. These are small elements that provide information and help users find content. They can be made by the user or added by the product. For example, on a Mac you can tag documents and other files using the macOS Finder so you can quickly locate files later on. Another example is Airbnb. They use tags to tell users the type of property, if the property is managed by a superhost, and to tell if there is a new low price. Last, there is Gmail. You can use tags, what they call labels, to tag emails. It helps you organize your emails based on what you find important. In the left panel, you can then find any email that has the corresponding tag. 17th are breadcrumbs. Do you remember the story of Hansel and Gretel walking through the woods, dropping breadcrumbs so they could find their way home? The same idea applies here. Breadcrumbs are links that help users figure out where they are in a website, and they are usually located at the top of a website, letting the user know what page they are currently on and any previous page they came from. For example, in Google Drive, as you navigate between folders, there is a breadcrumb list at the top of the window to let you know where you are within the file structure. 18th are carousels. These display content that moves horizontally either manually or automatically. They allow users to browse through a set numbers of pictures or content either forwards or backwards. Carousels are what you typically see on e-commerce websites to show product shots. For example, here is a carousel on Amazon to show product images that match shopping trends. You can also find them on Instagram when users post several images in a single post. 19th are notifications. Notifications provide relevant information to users, usually through a visual indicator and/or a short message. They are used to grab the user's attention for a specific purpose. Notifications can indicate a positive outcome, an error, or a warning message. Some notifications enable users to take action directly from the notification itself, while others send users to the place where they need to complete the task. For example, here are two notifications from Facebook. The first shows how many total notifications you have. The second appears as a quick summary in the bottom left corner of the screen when something new happens while you're viewing Facebook. Here is another example. When was the last time you felt a buzz in your pocket from someone texting you? That was your phone's way of notifying you via sound and buzzing that someone just sent words into your phone for you to read. When you opened your phone, there was a notification telling you what happened. Tapping on that notification showed you what to do next. Notifications are used in almost every app or product out there because they grab the user's attention. This can also be their downfall for users who receive too many of them. 20th are modals. Modals are everywhere online. They are used for ads, asking for your email, acknowledgement, creating something, etc. Modals contain content that purposefully interrupts users to require an action of some sort. They are displayed in front of all other content types and remain on screen until users have acknowledged the message and have taken action. For example, in Google Docs, if you delete a doc that has content in it, it will automatically delete it and show you this modal that lets you know what happened. You can't leave this screen until you choose to either take a document out of the trash or to go to the doc's home screen. Another example is Google Drive. When you choose to create a new folder, a modal shows up asking you to name the folder, then create it or cancel. 21st are menus. Menus display a list of choices or action on a temporary surface. Menus should be easy to interact with, contextual to the user needs, and easily scannable. For example, in Google Docs, when you click the File button, a menu appears with action related to the overall doc. Or if you press the Insert button, a menu shows up with the actions related to inserting something into the document. 22nd are cards. Cards are very popular these days, especially on mobile. They are rectangular modules that contain content and contextual actions. Well-designed cards make good use of space and present information clearly and efficiently, helping to guide users through many pieces of information. For example, Google Drive uses cards to give previews of content so you can easily tell what you're looking for. Another example of cards is with Airbnb. They use cards to show the availability of experiences. You can easily see which days it's available and at what time. 23rd are progress bars. These help users determine where they are in a sequence of steps. These can be found in e-commerce checkouts or setup wizards that tell you how many steps are left to complete. 24th are loaders, also known as pinners or progress indicators. These are animations that show the user the system is loading or completing an action, indicating the user needs to wait. Here is an example of a loader in Airbnb. As you scroll the map, the loader pops up at the top of the map to let you know it's searching. Additionally, the pictures of the houses gray out on the left, giving you feedback that it's loading. Every online product has loading states of some kind. That said, depending on the product, if you have screaming fast internet, you might not ever see them. 25th are tooltips, also known as hints. The goal of a tooltip is to provide contextual information of an element on mouse hover. For example, in Google Docs, when you hover on the comment icon, a tooltip shows up explaining what clicking on it does. In this case, open comment history. Also, it can be hard to initially understand the icons in the formatting toolbar. Upon hovering on any icons, a tooltip appears describing the icon's function. It can also be used to provide context on an element that needs further explanation. 26 are hamburger menus. These are navigation components that provide access to pages and functionalities. On mobile, they are almost always retracted by default to preserve the real estate, while on desktop they tend to be open by default and can manually be closed by the user. These usually appear in the top left of an app. For example, on Google Material Design site, the hamburger menu opens up to give a quick navigation to different areas of the website. Similarly, on the Audible app, the hamburger menu opens up their navigation to different features of the app, like your library or stats. 27s are accordions. These are used to expand or collapse vertically stacked items. When a page has a lot of settings or controls, they are grouped and hidden in an accordion to simplify the layout and reduce visual clutter. For example, on Google Material Design site, they use accordions to expand and collapse areas with a lot of content. Upon clicking one of the arrows, the area expands to show all of its contents. If you click on the arrow again, it collapses back to its original state. And that's it with our list. While this is non-exhaustive, it covers the main UI elements that are essential to the success of any design. There are countless reasons why knowing and using these common UI elements will benefit your designs. Users are already familiar with them and don't have to learn anything new. This is why knowledge of UI elements is essential. Being familiar with components and knowing which one to use depending on the context is a large part of your job as a UX designer. And that's it with this lesson. We covered a ton of UI elements. To quickly review them all, don't forget to download the slides at kickassux.com under the free UX course page. Happy learning!
From the margins on the side of a page to the content in between, layout is in many ways the foundation of design. It keeps balance and organization from one page to the next. Bad layout results in creating cognitive overload for your users. Good layout has solid hierarchy and visual relationships. And this video is all about helping you understand the difference. In this lesson, if it wasn't already super clear, we'll be talking about layout. We'll cover what layout is and why it's important. We'll talk about the concept of visual weight, and we're going to talk about crap. No, but seriously, we're going to talk about crap. Contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity. Let's get after it. Let's first talk about what layout is and why it's important. At the most basic level, layout is the structure and relationship between items on a page. For digital products, layout is all about figuring out the arrangement of images, text, and overall functionality. Let's look at it like a food recipe. If UI elements such as buttons, text, images, icons, etc. are the recipe ingredients, then layout provides the instructions for where and how you use those ingredients to make the overall recipe look and taste just right. For example, let's imagine we are designing a travel site. For the site, we are creating cards to display beautiful places that people could travel. When designing the layout of the card, we would have a few ingredients: a beautiful picture, a title, some body text, and a rectangle. The layout would be the directions of where we place these ingredients to create a cohesive, visually pleasing card. Good layout can be learned. It's part science and part art, just like a good recipe. So now let's talk about why it's important. Layout is important because it's quite literally how the information is organized and displayed on a page. Intentional placement of content helps users easily scan the page and find what they need. Like we talked about before, bad layout results in mental friction for your users. Good layout helps people to understand what they're seeing and find what they need. It has a solid sense of hierarchy and visual relationships. This helps the user to quickly scan and parse the contents of a page. Now that you have a general understanding of what layout is and why it's important, let's now talk about the concept of visual weight. When you think about object weight in the real world, this concept really isn't too hard to grasp. Stephen Bradley described it well in his article, 19 Factors That Impact Compositional Balance, when he said, "Visual weight is the perceived weight of a visual element. It's a measure of how much anything on the page attracts the eye of your viewer." Here are 6 factors that contribute to the perceived visual weight of an element on a page. Let's break down each of them. First is size. Elements that are larger appear to be heavier than those that are smaller. With that in mind, looking at these 2 squares, which one attracts your eye more? The bigger one, right? That's because our brains perceive it as being heavier than the other object. Second is space. Elements separated by space are perceived as heavier than those that are closer to other elements. For example, everything is exactly the same between both sets of text, except the vertical distance between the header and the body text on the right is double that of the example on the left. Because of that space, the second header has more visual weight. Third is color. There are 2 parts to color. First, elements with intense saturated colors appear to be heavier than those with more muted colors. Looking at these equal-sized squares, the bolder red square on the right draws our attention because its saturated color gives it more visual weight. Here's the second part of color. Objects with darker colors have more visual weight than those with lighter colors. For example, the circle on the left is a darker version of blue, so it draws our attention more than the lighter circle on the right. Fourth is dimension. 3-dimensional elements are perceived to be heavier than 2-dimensional elements. For example, looking at these 2 objects, the 3D cube has more perceived visual weight than the square on the right. This is because our minds can assign a make-believe weight to the 3D square, but it has no reference to assign a weight to the 2D object. Fifth is proximity. Elements in close proximity to one another in an area provide the perception of more visual weight in that area. For example, the 4 squares on the right draw our eyes slightly more than the 4 on the left because the space between elements is less. And last, location. An object's visual weight increases as it gets further away from the center of the composition. For example, look at the 2 canvases below. The green square on the right canvas draws our attention more because it's really far away from the center of the composition. It's important to understand the concept of visual weight because it's directly involved in how we lay out objects on a page. Now that we've talked about visual weight, let's talk about CRAP. And no, again, we're not talking about bowel movements. CRAP is a set of 4 design principles of layout created by Robin Patricia Williams: contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity. Let's begin with contrast. Contrast is all about using visual weight to make elements stand out and draw our attention. It's used to help move the audience's focus to the most important things they should see and understand. Usually, whatever element has the largest contrast is understood to be the most important thing on the screen. Contrast enables us to get a faster understanding of hierarchy and quickly see important pieces of information. Because it's 100% related to visual weight, contrast can be created through color, shape, size, interaction, proximity, font choice, symmetry, and the list goes on. Color contrast in particular is incredibly important for visual accessibility. Let's look at an example of contrast in the UI of MailChimp. Before we break it down, just take a moment and see what stands out to you. As a quick reminder, the reason that elements stand out to you is because of visual weight and contrast. Looking at this image, 6 things immediately stand out. First is the picture. Our eyes go there immediately because it's the biggest thing on the screen, is off-center, has a person in it, and has the most color. In short, this object has the most contrast and visual weight. There's one thing to add here. In general, as humans, our eyes are drawn to other people. And so in this case, not only does it have the most contrast and visual weight, but because it has a person, our eyes are attracted there even more. Second is the headline. Our eyes then travel from the picture to the element most related to it to try and learn about the picture. The headline is the second biggest element on the screen, creating contrast in its size. Third, the Watch Now button. The contrast through color and size and the proximity to the headline draw our eyes to it. Fourth, the Sign Up Free button in the top right. Because the button has the same color as the Watch Now button, the similarity in color and the visual weight attracts our attention. Fifth, the text below the headline. Finally, the MailChimp logo. Of course, you may have looked at the elements in a different order, but hopefully you get the idea. Contrast helps draw our attention and set elements apart from one another. It helps focus our attention on what matters most. When contrast is applied correctly, it's something that you probably shouldn't notice. Next up, there's repetition. Repetition is about unity and consistency. It helps people quickly understand what they're looking at because they can see all similar elements. Think about repetition this way. It's a lot easier to look at 24 objects that look the same than to look at 24 unique objects. Our brains have to parse each different object separately. Whereas with repetition, our brains can group all like objects together and quickly understand what's going on. For example, every person on a soccer team wears the same jersey. The differentiating elements are the numbers and names of each player on each jersey. And even the numbers and names usually appear in the same place. So if you want to know this information, you know where to look. Could you imagine a sports team that had varying jersey colors or patterns? It would be really hard to tell who was on the same team. With all of this in mind, as repetition is all about consistency, it's super important to keep the patterns, colors, fonts, branding, and functionality consistent across a product. Let's look at Pitch's website to see how they use repetition. First, they are very intentional with their color choice and font. You'll see the same font styles and colors throughout every part of their website. Their main gradient is used on their primary button as their background for their product photo and their testimonials. Additionally, they use the same spacing and layout choices throughout their website. They also cleverly repeat the exact same collaborator style for their testimonials as they use in their product. This helps our brains draw the connection between the way people collaborate in their app and how they see folks who are providing them with reviews. They're also very consistent with their 3D illustration, even down to their sign-up form. Next up in crap is alignment. Alignment is all about the organization of elements relative to a line or margin. A design with poor alignment is like walking into a room that's cluttered and hard to navigate. It makes you uneasy and it can be frustrating to try to even make sense of everything around you. Alignment is important for 4 reasons. 1, it matches how people naturally scan and focus on content. 2, it's visually appealing. 3, it provides a sense of balance. And 4, it creates a relationship between similarly aligned elements. There are 2 basic kinds of alignment: edge alignment and center alignment. With edge alignment, elements align consistently to the left or right. With center alignment, elements are aligned consistently in the center. Using a grid to align elements can really help create a sense of cohesion and establish a relationship between elements. This is really helpful for scannability. And finally in crap, there's proximity. This principle states that elements that are close together are seen as related. This closeness shows connectedness. This helps create perceived groupings, and these groupings reduce cognitive load and increase readability. Here's an example with Google Flights. The type of trip, number of passengers, search fields, dates, and filters are all close together. The close proximity shows that they all work together. If you're familiar with the Gestalt principles, this should sound familiar because it's the exact same as the proximity Gestalt principle. Before we wrap up this lesson though, we want to expand crap to include an H, a B, and a W. So it's trap-a-wa. Kind of a weird combination of crab, chap, raw, and crap. Hopefully that creature really doesn't exist. Anyway, the H is for hierarchy, and it's all about the correct ordering and visual treatment to allow users to easily scan and understand your content. Yes, hierarchy and contrast are very related, but we thought it was important to call it out as being separate because so many websites have a lot of contrast, but still they don't have great hierarchy. Use hierarchy to establish relationships between parent and child content, create categories, and generally build a sense of order and organization. Proper use of hierarchy will help make your designs easy to understand and help users figure out what matters most on the page. For example, Nike's navigation provides a clear sense of hierarchy through font styles and space. The top-level categories of new and featured, men, women, kids, sale, and back to school as tabs help to establish where you are and what you're looking at. The space between those options and the menu beneath provides extra visual weight to show their importance and highlight their hierarchy of information. Then, in the main section, they use large labels and smaller text to show where each item belongs. That's a great use of hierarchy. Next, in the trap-a-wa, there's B, which is balance. This plays into the Gestalt principle of symmetry. And yes, this one also plays into alignment, but again, it's something that we believe is important to call out. When something is imbalanced, our brain wants to fill in the gaps and find the missing pieces to make up different shapes that aren't there. Balance creates harmony, associations between content, and helps lessen cognitive load. Look how Airbnb creates balance in their online experiences page. You can literally split the page down the middle and it's equal on both sides. This creates a wonderful sense of harmony. And finally, there's W for white space. And no, this doesn't just mean using a bunch of white in your designs. White space refers to the negative space or space between your content. We left white space for last because it's used in all of the other principles for layout. Proper use of white space can help define and separate sections, establish relationships between different pieces of information, and it gives your content room to breathe. For example, look at Airbnb's Help Center. We're using their old one because their new one isn't as good of an example. Anyway, they use a generous amount of white space to separate the header and each of their sections. It makes the page feel light and easy to consume, even though there's a lot of information. If the white space is removed, the page doesn't feel as easy to consume because it's cramped and harder to tell each section apart. Trapawa are another set of principles to consider when building a layout of a page. We recommend you use them along with the Gestalt principles as both sets are interrelated. Okay, we made it to the end. To recap, layout is the structure and relationships between items on a page. Intentional placement of content helps users easily scan the page and find what they need. Visual weight is a measure of how much anything on the page attracts the eye of your viewer. And finally, we covered the very strange creature, Trapawa. Contrast, hierarchy, repetition, alignment, balance, proximity, and white space. The secret to great design is in the way visual elements are arranged in relation to one another. And that's what layout design is all about. We really hoped you loved this lesson and look forward to seeing you in the next one. When you're new in UX, it's really easy to design a highly complex solution, which is not what you want. Usually, your designs only make sense to you. That's why a great practice is to analyze competitors' solutions. And in this video, we'll show you how to do just that so you can gain inspiration and design solutions that make sense to everyone. Before we get started, you'll notice an exercise in the Figma workbook under the Analyzing the Competition tab. So if you don't have your Figma workbook yet, go download it at kickassux.com under the free UX course page. All right, let's get started. Analyzing competitors and even non-competitors that have a similar problem will help you fast-track your design thinking. That's because it helps you gain inspiration from how other companies have solved a similar problem. Don't get us wrong, looking at your competitor solutions doesn't mean that you can't be creative. Doing this will kickstart your creative process. It's worth mentioning that not all competitors have strong design standards. Companies that don't invest in UX usually create highly complex solutions. Even still, it's helpful to see how they solve the problem so you can find an opportunity to do it better. Additionally, their designs might be tapping into a known mental model for users. So you want to make sure you understand what they've created just in case your users have the same mental models. Up until now, you went through the research and understanding phase, which means that you know what problem you're solving and who your users and competitors are. Now, it's time to take screenshots of how others tackle the problem. Here are the 4 steps. First, using the problem you framed in the Framing the Problem lesson, make a list of 7 to 10 competitors. If you've been following along, you already created a list of the 3 most direct competitors in your competitive analysis. Add other companies that solve similar problems to the list. For example, let's say you have an all-online product and you're trying to make it work offline. Look at competitors who already have an offline mode and see how they designed it. Don't limit your list to only direct competitors because they might not have an offline feature. It's more about the feature than the competitor. Find other products that have an offline mode so you can capture as many screenshots as possible and see how it's done. For example, even though it does, let's say that Spotify didn't have an offline mode. On one hand, you would find out how direct competitors like Apple Music or Tidal make the offline feature work. On the other hand, you could look at other products that already have a similar feature, such as Dropbox or Google Drive. Looking outside of direct competitors broadens your perspective and provides you with insight and creative ways to solve your problem. Second, now that you have a list of competitors, log into each product and take screenshots of the competitor's experience that relate to your problem. While it might seem straightforward at first, the problem that you tackle has a lot more components to capture than you might expect. Using the same offline feature example, many surrounding components related to the problem might appear. For instance, how do competitors educate users about the offline feature? Does a banner appear telling you that you're offline? Does it stay on screen the whole time? Or does it come up once and then disappear? Is there no banner at all? What happens to the controls that aren't available offline? Are they still enabled or disabled? Or are they completely removed? There are a lot more screenshots to capture than you think. You need to think of everything that might apply. Third, once you've collected your screenshots, import them into Figma or FigJam so you can look for insights and gain a high-level view. Group these screenshots based on the patterns that you observe and then come up with labels for each group. This should feel really familiar because you're basically creating an affinity diagram with your screenshots. If you haven't yet watched the lesson on affinity diagramming, make sure to check it out and apply what you learn here. For example, imagine that you've collected a bunch of screenshots. At this point, you haven't identified patterns. After you've spent some time organizing them based on the patterns you observe, your collection of screenshots would go from something like this to this. At this stage, your screenshots are organized in distinct groups. Once your groups are formed, label them. In the offline feature example, the first group might be called Offline Feature Education, the second, Available Offline Folder, and the third, Offline Banner. Now for the fourth and last step. After you've organized all of your screenshots into groups, rate each screenshot based on which provides the most elegant design. When rating them, ask yourself which solution solves the problem the best and why. Which is the simplest? Which is the most intuitive? Rate each screenshot from 1 to 4, with 1 being poor, 2 okay, 3 good, 4 excellent. These screenshots give you a high-level view of how your competitors solve a similar problem. Also, you'll have an archive of your competitors' IA and UI elements, which provide a great reference. To recap, you can fast-track your design thinking by looking at other solutions. Doing this will give you a starting place for your creative process and help you discern how to tackle the problem in the simplest and most intuitive way. Beware, not all competitors have strong design standards. Companies that don't invest in UX usually create highly complex solutions. Finally, we covered the action steps to take from capturing, categorizing, rating the screenshots of competitor solutions, and that basically what you're creating is an affinity diagram. This method will help you start your designs on the right foot. It can prevent you from creating a highly complex solution that's not user-friendly. And again, you're trying to create a product that fits users' existing mental models. This helps ensure that you're considering all design patterns so you can create a solution that feels intuitive and familiar to users. And this analysis is useful throughout the design process. Referring back to this as you go through the rest of the UX process will continually inspire your information architecture and visual design. Now it's your turn. Go to the Analyzing the Competition tab in the Figma workbook and start adding screenshots of competitors. Normally, you'd take screenshots of 7 to 10 competitors or similar products. But for this free course, you just need to look at 3 products: AllTrails, Gaia, and WTA, the Washington Trails Association. And as one last reminder, if you don't have your Figma workbook yet, go download it at kickassux.com under the free UX course page. Happy analyzing! If there's one thing that's universal about UX designers everywhere, it's that we are always sketching. Sketching is a blast. It helps you get out a ton of ideas and quickly validate them. So get your pen and paper ready because we're going to dive in and talk about sketching in UX. The Oxford Dictionary defines the word sketch as make a rough drawing of. That's the main idea we want to get across. It's rough. It's not meant to be pristine and look perfect. It's meant to rapidly translate your thoughts on paper. There are so many reasons why we sketch. We sketch to explore concepts. We sketch to communicate our thoughts and ideas to others. Concepts can be tricky to explain with words. Sketching helps to get the meaning across. We sketch to get feedback on ideas. Sketching can be a fantastic way to validate your concepts before you spend time wireframing. We also sketch to refine ideas, to make them better, to hone them into something pure. There's almost always a way you can improve your designs. Sketching can help you get there quickly, which is another reason why we sketch, because it's fast, which means it saves you time. To illustrate exactly what I mean about that, here's a slightly embarrassing personal story from a conference I went to. During a rapid prototyping session, we were told to sketch out a bunch of ideas onto note cards and then line them up into something cohesive. Instead, I whipped out my computer because I was convinced that I could wireframe faster than everyone else around me who was sketching. At the end of the allotted time, I was only about 75% done, and I'm fast at wireframing. Let's put that into perspective. Let's say I'm starting on a project and I want to jump to wireframing instead of sketching. At 75% the speed, wireframing would take me a full 8 hours, while sketching would have allowed me to finish 2 hours earlier. Now multiply that over a 5-day work week. That would be 10 hours of wasted time. It adds up quickly. And bear in mind that 75% is a super optimistic speed compared to sketching. It's so much faster to sketch. Switching between different ideas and concepts while wireframing is tough, Unless you're using a wireframing kit, you have to create every object from scratch, which takes time. If you decide to move something, it takes even more time. Plus, once you start wireframing, you naturally want to make it look nicer, which is a huge mistake at this point in the process. If you were sketching instead, it's simple to create new ideas or switch to a new one. All you have to do is just move your hand over and draw more shapes. And the best part, almost everyone can sketch. Your sketches don't have to look great to do what you need them to do. Again, your goals are to explore, generate ideas, communicate with others, get feedback, refine your concepts, and save time. Before putting pen to paper, determine if you are designing for mobile, Android or Apple, or for desktop. It's important to figure that out up front because that will determine the screen orientation and resolution for your designs. If you're designing for mobile, you can then use a ruler to draw a small portrait rectangle. The same goes for desktop, but you'll draw a larger landscape rectangle. To make the most of your sketching session, whip out your research including these 3 items. First, framing the problem. Second, your affinity diagram. And third, the competitor's screenshots that you put together earlier in this course. The framing the problem and affinity diagram are high-level documents that you should keep referring back to throughout any UX project. The reason you pull them back out now is to help set up your mental state. Use these as a refresher to kickstart the exercise. Then, start by looking at competitors' screenshots to get a sense for how they solve the problem. For example, let's say that you're creating a new work management app and you're working on a new feature for sharing. You would start by looking at your competitors' screenshots to understand how they designed their sharing features. Keep in mind, these are used to generate ideas, so don't just copy them outright. Now you're prepared to make the most of your sketching session. So to begin sketching, create a container for either mobile or desktop that you'll sketch inside. We talked about this earlier. Next, referencing your research and how others have solved the problem, start generating sketches. Even if you feel lost or like your ideas are stupid, just put your pen down and start drawing bad ideas. Keep exploring. UX designers are pioneers that dedicate serious time to finding new ideas and bringing those ideas into the world. We have to look at all possible options and iterate. To do that, we sketch. And with that in mind, a big difference between entry-level and senior-level UX designers is how many different options they explore before settling on the idea they believe is best. And even once they settled on an idea, they iterated on it over and over. They didn't just settle with the original idea. That's exploration. It's about looking at all the possibilities. You don't know how something good might be until you see it. Yes, you can work through many ideas in your head, but you can't work through everything. Most of the time, sketching sparks new and better ideas. Here are a few final tips before signing off. First, remember that your sketches don't need to be pretty. They just need to outline the placement of your UI elements. Second, do your best to draw straight lines. It's something that you can practice and will help you with your sketching in the long run. Third, keep your sketches high level, at least at first. You don't need to get into the details or use colored pencils or pens. Lines, boxes, and other shapes are plenty to get the idea across. Think of your sketches as your solution's skeleton. They help you uncover the ideal information architecture. Finally, always create multiple sketches of the same screen and weigh the pros and cons of each one until you're happy with one in particular. Keep in mind that your sketches only show a snapshot in time. They don't illustrate how a user moves through your solution. That's what a user flow is about, but don't worry about that for now. We'll talk about that in a future video. To recap, sketching is the process of making a rough drawing. And we sketch to explore concepts, to communicate our thoughts, to get feedback, to generate many different ideas, to refine those ideas, and because it's fast. Now it's your turn. Open the Figma workbook and go to the sketching tab. If you haven't already downloaded the Figma workbook, go to kickassux.com and go to the free course page. Once you've opened the file, it's time to start sketching all of the screens that play a central role in your product. When you're done sketching, take pictures of all of your sketches using your smartphone and upload them to the Figma file. When people think of UX, people generally think of wireframes. They are considered one of the most important deliverables throughout the UX process. By the end of this video, we hope that we'll have demystified wireframes and empowered you with enough knowledge to make your own. In this lesson, we're going to go over wireframes, what they are, the pros, the cons, the tools you can use to create them, some tips, we'll look at wireframes compared to other design documents, and finally, how to do it for yourself. Let's get after it. So let's start off by defining what wireframes are. As defined by usability.gov, a wireframe is a two-dimensional illustration of a page's interface that specifically focuses on space allocation and prioritization of content, functionalities available, and intended behaviors. If this definition puts you to sleep, here's an illustration of an angry cat in a box. That cat knows about space allocation. To put it far more simply, just think of wireframes as low-fidelity digital illustrations of a website. Here's an example. Because they're low fidelity, they do not include any styling, color, or graphics. Think of wireframing as the skeleton of your website. They are static, don't show interactions, and are entirely about communicating the site's structure and functionality. You don't need to have the details ready before creating wireframes. They can be high level and conceptual, or they can have more detail. It's really up to you and where you are in the process. As you iterate on your designs, you'll move your wireframes up the fidelity food chain, adding more and more detail. In case you weren't aware, for some design terminology, final designs that are high fidelity are generally referred to as mockups or comps. Comp stands for comprehensive, and it's the final version of what the page will actually look like. Now, let's talk about the pros of wireframes. First, they're relatively quick to make because they usually aren't that detailed and don't use any color. Second, they provide early visuals to communicate layout, concepts, functionality, and interactions with team members. Third, they're easy to turn into low-fidelity prototypes to test with users. And fourth, they're easy to change. At this point, you might be saying, that sounds great. Why would I do anything else? So let's talk about the downsides of wireframing. There are two primary cons. First, because they are lower fidelity, they don't include the details or technical functionality. This can make wireframes harder for team members, users, or clients to envision. Second, as you increase the detail in the wireframe with real content, it can throw off the layout. Regardless of the pros or cons, wireframing is still considered to be one of the main UX deliverables. It's usually a necessary step that you'll take to successfully complete a case study. Let's move on to wireframing tools. There are many tools that you can use for wireframing, but here are just a few. Figma, Sketch, Balsamiq, Miro, Axure, and Adobe XD. That was a bit quick and easy. Let's get a bit more into the weeds by talking about some tips for wireframing. First, start with sketching. Sketching can jumpstart your creative process and help you get miles further with your wireframes. Second, don't use color. Stay with black and white or grayscale. You don't want people to get caught up in the visual design. At this stage, you're trying to define functionality. Third, use free wireframing kits to get started quickly. The Figma community has a ton of different free wireframing kits that you can download to get you started. Download one or two of them to save yourself some time. Fourth, don't fall in love with your first great idea. Keep iterating. We've said it before and we'll say it again. One of the major differences between an entry-level and senior UX designer is that the senior continues to explore. They don't stop with their first good idea. They try out a ton of concepts so they can choose what works best. Now, let's compare wireframes with other design documents so there's no confusion about UX deliverables. First, wireframes versus mockups. We've already talked about this a bit, but let's go over it again. Here's an example of each, with a wireframe on the left and a mockup on the right. Mockups are high-fidelity visuals of the product that you're creating. They show what the product is actually going to look like. After prototyping and testing, you'll turn your wireframes into mockups. Mockups are where you finalize your visual decisions and experiment with different styles and placements. Next, there are prototypes. A prototype is a clickable early version of a website meant to simulate user interactions so you can get feedback on a concept. They're made by linking screens together and creating interactions on a page to show how the product works. You can build a prototype at varying stages of the UX process. It can be built early on, in the wireframing stage, or when things are more visually finalized, like in the example on screen. The main point is that they are functional, dynamic, and simulate user interaction. By contrast, wireframes are static and low fidelity. Now let's talk about how to turn your sketches into wireframes. Before wireframing, gather the following artifacts to guide you throughout the wireframing process. First, framing the problem. Second, your competitors' screenshots. And third, your sketches. Then start by opening your wireframing software. Next, select the right screen resolution frame depending on whether you're designing for desktop or mobile. If you're designing for desktop, choose a resolution of 1440 by 1024 pixels or 1280 by 720 pixels. By choosing a smaller size, it forces you to simplify your designs and ensure they'll work across different screen sizes. For mobile, use a resolution of 375 by 812 pixels for iOS and 360 by 640 pixels for Android. Then, pull up the website or app you are working on so you can use a similar layout in your wireframes. For example, if you're designing a new feature for Airbnb, pull up their website to see their general layout. This provides the structure to build your wireframes in. Before taking a screenshot, make sure to use the plugin Window Resizer to set the browser to the resolution you chose. Make sure you don't skip this. because that way, when you drop the screenshots into Figma, they'll automatically fit into the frames and they'll be at the correct breakpoint size. This ensures that you'll get the correct measurements of font size, spacing, etc. You can also use these screenshots as stencils/templates, where you just draw your shapes over them like this. When wireframing and designing in general, it's important to think through all of the elements that will be reusable. In this case, each card is being reused over and over again. That means we can turn our wireframe version into a component. Then, if we make one change, it will change all of them. While this takes a little bit of time up front to set up, it saves you a ton of time in the long run. Once the component is set up, we recommend you move it somewhere where you won't accidentally mess it up. Then, you can just copy and paste it throughout the frame. Don't try to be pixel perfect here. Seriously, if you do, the pixel monster will come out of your closet and roast your computer in the flames of hellfire. Anyway, when you're actually wireframing, just start dragging in elements from the wireframing kit library. Using these objects, start copying the company's permanent UI elements onto your wireframe. Don't overthink it. And that's really it to wireframing. To recap, wireframes are static, low-fidelity digital illustrations of a website. They don't include any styling or color and are the skeleton of your website. They are relatively quick to make because you aren't focused on visual design. They provide early visuals that can be used to communicate layout, concepts, functionality, and interactions with team members. They are really easy to iterate on. You can quickly turn them into a low-fidelity prototype to test with users, and we showed you an example of how to wireframe in Figma. When you get hired as a UX designer, we recommend that you annotate your wireframes and keep design documentation to help people understand what's happening on the screen. To do this, add a section next to your wireframes explaining how it works and anything else that's important to note. Now it's your turn. Go to the Wireframes tab in your Figma workbook and start creating your wireframes for the REI hiking app. As a reminder, if you haven't already, and at this point, I honestly don't know how you wouldn't have done it yet, go to kickassux.com and go to the free UX course page to download the Figma workbook. Then, when you're actually wireframing, use your framing the problem, competitor screenshots, and sketches to guide your wireframing session. Happy wireframing!
Hey, what's up, Kickass fam? So, just like a good story has a beginning, middle, and end, a good product experience helps users to go through the end-to-end journey, from the beginning all the way to the end. And to do this, UX designers create what's called user flows. After this lesson, you'll complete your own user flows in the Figma workbook. Alright, let's get started. Look at this image. It's a beautiful picture of a snowy mountain. Big deal, right? But what if I was to tell you that it's only a small piece of a larger image? As you can see, that picture was just a small portion of the greater image. The first picture only gave you a small glimpse of the entire experience. This gives you the full view. After all, how can you understand what's there if you can't see the big picture? That's what user flows give us, a full picture of the user experience. In this lesson, we're going to cover user flows, what they are, and how to take wireframes you just created and turn them into user flows. But before we can dive into user flows, we first need to understand flowcharts. As defined by the Oxford Dictionary, a flowchart is a diagram of the sequence of actions of people or things involved in a system or activity. It shows how things work together in a sequence, what decisions happen along the way, and the outcomes. Here is a flowchart for a robot vacuum cleaner. It shows all the stages the vacuum goes through and the decision points along the way until the vacuum finally turns itself off. The shapes used in these flowcharts have meaning. Peels denote the start and the end of the process. Arrows show the direction of the flow and the relationship between different steps in the process. The parallelogram denotes an input or output. Rectangles represent a process, diamonds represent a decision, and the circle with an X shows a summing junction of points that happen simultaneously. In this example, the vacuum turned on and planned its route at the same time before following the route. With this out of the way, we can now talk about user flows. User flows are a type of flowchart that keep the user at the center of the flow. There is a lot of confusion out there about the terminology of user flow and what it truly means. There are a few different terms that people throw around, such as wire flows, task flows, screen flows, UI flows. Anyway, you name it, but don't worry about the semantics. What matters is a technique and how valuable it is to you and your process. There are two ways to create them. First, just like a flowchart. Here is an example of a user flow of someone trying to get directions through Google Maps. This type of user flow is really helpful when you want to better map out the flow of screens before getting into any details. The second way to create them is by using wireframes or high-fidelity mockups to show how each screen connects with the others and the decisions a user would make to accomplish a task. They are a cheap and fast way to get a holistic view of the user experience. They show how things work together, ending with the achievement of the user's goal. User flows are helpful to get the entire team on the same page so that anyone who looks at your work can understand how each page and interaction fit together. You can use user flows to document an existing product or to design something from scratch. They focus on flow above all else, which means you can create the information architecture that follows users' expectations. Now let's talk about how to create your own user flow. First thing first, choose a user goal to create the flow for. For example, using Google Maps to get directions. Next, determine if you want to create a basic user flow or a more visual one using your wireframes. What you choose will really depend on where you are in your process. If you've been following along with the free course, we recommend you choose the more visual user flow using your wireframes. If you want to create a basic user flow without mapping the screens together, pull out a Word document and start writing down all the tasks in order that it would take to complete the user's goal. Using the example of getting directions in Google Maps. First, I'd log in. Then I'd input an address. Next, I'd view all the locations and choose the correct one to get directions. Then, I'd confirm the route and start the directions. Finally, I would close the app once we got there. From there, you will take that information and start inputting it into user flows. Make sure to think through what the system will have to process as well. For example, in between logging in and the map loading, the system would have to authorize the user and then load their location based on where they currently are. You might have to do it multiple times to get the hang of it and to think through all the connections and processes. Let's move on to the more visual user flow. To create this one, gather all the wireframe you've created. If you've been following along, you should have most of your screens wireframed. Start with the first screen the user interacts with. Then, add the next screens that branch from that first screen, showing how they connect to one another. In this case, pressing more info would open up the model on the second screen, providing more details about the show. And on the second screen, pressing the X or anywhere outside of the model would close and take you back to the first screen. Then, you keep adding more and more screens showing the connection between each until you have a complete picture. And that's it. To recap, we talked about flowcharts, which are diagrams of a sequence of actions involved in a system or activity. User flows are a type of a flowchart that keep the user at the center of the flow. User flows are created using wireframes or high-fidelity mockups to show how a user completes a task from beginning to end. Now it's your turn. Go to the user flow tab in the Figma workbook to create your user flows. If you don't have your workbook yet, go download it at kickassux.com under the free UX course page. You got this.
If you're building a new product, how do you ensure that customers have the best experience? Similarly, how would you discover usability issues and find areas where customers are struggling so you can fix those problems before the product is released? The answer? Usability testing. But you have to have something to test. So unless you're testing an existing product, you'll be testing a prototype. So let's dive into the world of prototyping and usability testing. In this video, we'll cover what usability testing is, the 6 reasons why it's essential, what prototyping is, and prototyping tools. Before getting into the meat of this lesson, we have 2 questions for you. First, have you ever been in a situation where you didn't know what to decide? You weighed all of your options, but didn't feel like you could make a decision. This sort of situation happens all of the time in design. That's where usability testing comes in. It allows us to check in with our users to make sure that what we designed is useful, relevant, and meaningful. Here's another question for you. Have you ever been caught in an argument with someone that was going nowhere? You both likely made good points, and at the end of the day, neither of you had the evidence at hand to support your claims. It's like talking at a wall. Usability testing is one of the best ways to avoid those arguments because it gives you evidence to back up your design decisions. We have been questioned many times during our careers about our design choices. On most occasions, we can easily back up our decisions with evidence because we base our designs on research and usability testing. Without evidence, the only supporting arguments for your design choices are your opinions, which can be quickly challenged by someone else. That's not a situation you want to be in as a UX designer. So with all of that in mind, it's important to know how to prepare for and run usability tests on your own to validate your designs. And while not every project needs usability testing, your decisions should, to the extent possible, be based on research. So now let's answer the question, what is usability testing? Usability.gov defines it this way. Usability testing refers to evaluating a product or service by testing it with representative users. During a test, participants will try to complete typical tasks while observers watch, listen, and take notes. The goal is to identify any usability problems, collect qualitative and quantitative data, and to determine the participant's satisfaction with the product. Remember the definition of UX? It's the process of making a product or service useful, relevant, and meaningful for people. That's what you're testing for. You're testing to assess if your product is useful and easy to understand and navigate. You're also testing if it's valuable and desirable. Think of usability tests like experiments that scientists run. That's precisely what we're doing here, but instead of testing chemical reactions, we're examining how well our interface meets user needs. And just as a scientist conducts experiments to answer certain questions, UX designers do the same through usability testing. This is how a usability test session goes. First is the introduction, where you welcome the participant. Then you provide a quick overview of the study and explain what to expect. You then reassure your participant that you are not testing them, but you are testing the product, that there are no right or wrong answers, and that any feedback is welcome, positive or negative. Next, you ask their permission to record the session. And before you start the study, ask them if they have any questions. Second are the pre-study questions. Ask about your participant's background and any other demographic or psychographic questions that you find relevant for your study. Next, send them the prototype link and ask your participant to share their screen. Third are the scenarios and tasks. Read a quick scenario to provide them with the context and state of mind that they are supposed to be in while taking that test. Next, you provide your participants with tasks to complete using the prototype. Then watch them go about completing each task. At the end of the last task, you wrap up the prototype portion of the usability test. Finally, you ask post-study questions to get their overall thoughts and satisfaction levels. It's one more chance to gather insightful data. And that's it. Similar to user interviews, you really only need 4 to 8 participants to get a solid picture of the usability of your product. And as always, what's important is that you are talking with the actual target user of the product, not just some random person. So once you've conducted at least 4 to 5 usability tests, you would then analyze your test results, looking for commonalities across each participant. Analyzing usability test data is all about going back over the notes, transcripts, and videos from testing to find emerging themes and usability problems. For example, If 4 of 5 participants struggled to complete a task, that's a significant finding that you'd record and report in your analysis. By the way, for analysis tools, we recommend using a program like Dovetail to analyze your test results. Here are 5 objective metrics you can use to monitor task completion. 1. Successful task completion. 2. Critical errors. 3. Non-critical errors. 4. Error-free rate. And 5. Time on task. So for example, after completing 5 usability tests, 4 of the 5, or 80%, successfully completed task 1. 5 of 5 completed task 2. On task 1, only 1 participant had critical errors along the way, meaning they wouldn't have been able to figure it out on their own without your help. On task 2, 2 participants had critical errors. On task 1, 3 out of 5 had non-critical errors. Non-critical errors are where the participant is able to recover and don't affect the participant's ability to successfully complete the task. On task 2, 0 participants had non-critical errors. On task 1, only 2 of the 5 had no errors whatsoever. On task 2, 3 of 5 were error-free. And the average time to complete task 1 was 3 minutes and 20 seconds. The maximum time to complete task 1 for one of the participants was 5 minutes and 15 seconds. The minimum for another participant was 2 minutes. For task 2, the average was 2 minutes and 15 seconds, and so on. You may also use more subjective metrics that you ask your participants, such as how difficult each task was, their level of satisfaction with each task, what they liked the most, what they liked the least, ease of use, and their overall satisfaction. When you're employed as a UX designer, many times you'll compile all of your insights from your usability testing into an analysis document that shows your findings to stakeholders. This helps you justify the design direction and gain support for your solution. So what are the elements to include in your analysis? There are 4 things. First, the objective and subjective metrics that we just talked about. Second, other themes or patterns that show up across multiple participants. For example, the word on the button didn't fit the mental model of 3 out of 5 participants. Another example could be 4 out of 5 participants easily added a profile picture to their account. The third thing you'll want to include are important quotes, such as an issue with the functionality, love of an interaction, or another insightful quote. For example, a participant may have shared something like this: "I usually struggle with tech, but I have to say this was actually quite easy to use." This is a great quote to use in your analysis because this shows that even non-tech savvy users can understand it. It's a testament to the quality of the product and your designs. The last thing to include in your analysis are videos and audio clips of your participants. This shows stakeholders directly how easy or difficult it was for participants to complete each task. For example, from 2 minutes and 45 seconds to 4 minutes, participant number 1 was struggling to find the share button and needed to be prompted to get to the next step. That's a really awkward thing for stakeholders to watch, and it really helps them build empathy for the user. There are several ways to package your usability test report. Depending on the size and importance of the project, some companies will expect you to make a slide deck and present your results. Others want a document that outlines the findings. As a UX generalist, because research isn't your number one job, we believe a document of your findings is more than sufficient. A document is faster to create and helps you highlight the most important analytics without wasting time on how best to present the data. Plus, you can use an app like Dovetail to really make your testing report shine. Usability testing is an indispensable practice in UX because it provides real-world data on how users interact with your product. It's not something that you do to check a box saying that you did it. It's a critical part of the process. And remember, you're testing the product, not the user. You want to understand to what extent your product helps the user reach their goals. Let's dig into that a bit more and talk through the 6 main reasons we conduct usability testing. First, to learn how well your product or service actually helps users complete the specified task and how long it takes to finish those tasks. Second, to understand your users' goals and motivations. By observing them as they go about a task, you learn why they do what they do and can probe further into the problems you see them facing. Third, to diagnose issues with your interface and figure out the changes needed to increase efficiency and performance. Fourth, to learn how satisfied users are with your product or service, which is crucial to the overall success and longevity of your product. Fifth, to help designers, product managers, developers, and other stakeholders build empathy for the user. And sixth, to provide you with a clear idea of how to make the best functional designs for your users. This means that your study participants are co-creators of the design outcome. It puts less pressure on you as the designer to come up with the perfect answer. With all this talk about usability testing, let's switch gears and talk about one of the primary things you actually test, a prototype. With that in mind, let's go over what a prototype is. A prototype is an early sample, model, or release of a product built to test a concept. This is the perfect definition for 2 reasons. First off, prototypes are built early in the process. That way, not much time and money have been invested in the project if you discover what you designed doesn't work. And second, and most importantly, a prototype is a sample you create to test a concept. It's not the full product with everything figured out. Prototypes are all about getting your ideas out as early as possible in a manner that will allow you to learn and iterate on them. They're created so you can put it in front of people and see if the idea has any value. They can be anywhere on the spectrum between low to high fidelity. Because there aren't any detailed interactions, low fidelity prototypes are typically used to help validate navigation and the journey a user would go through when using the product. High fidelity prototypes are more detailed, have a more involved experience, and feel much more like the final product. High fidelity prototypes focus on the exact interactions of the product. They typically include things like animations, visuals, or conditional logic, where based on your actions with the prototype, you'll get a different result. All in all, you can sum up what a prototype is with these 3 statements. A prototype is anywhere on the spectrum of fidelity, cheaper to build than the final product because software development is expensive, and a prototype is made to test the usability of the product and validate concepts. Moving on, in the digital world, there are 3 basic categories of prototypes. First, there are coded prototypes. These are prototypes that model the final product using real code. These are really time-consuming to create and require a high skill level because you need to have coding and development knowledge. Unless you're a developer or someone who's really interested in code, don't worry about creating this type of prototype. We just wanted you to be aware of them. Second are paper prototypes. These are the sketched versions of the website, feature, or product that you're creating. They're made up of multiple sketches that are linked together either by a software program or by you during a usability test. The purpose of a paper prototype is to validate a concept early on to get feedback before you start creating the design on your computer. Paper prototypes are valuable because they get your ideas out of your head and into a semi-functional form that you can get feedback on super quickly. You only need 2 things to create paper prototypes: pen and paper. Once you've created all of your drawings, all you have to do is link them together. There are a few choices you can make. First, you can manually link them yourself. This would mean you leave your sketches in paper form and have folks click or tap using their finger or pen. You would then show them the corresponding sketch depending on their decisions. Unfortunately, this can really only be done well in person. The second option is to use an app like Pop by Marvel or Figma to take photos and link the screens together to create an interactive experience. The last type of prototype are digital prototypes. Digital prototypes have both the interactions and appearance of the intended design. They're created using software that links together wireframes or mockups. They don't have to be high fidelity to be useful. Wireframe prototypes can be just as helpful for gathering feedback as high fidelity prototypes. That said, sometimes you need to prototype highly detailed interactions to make sure that everything works together and makes sense to the user. Here's an example of a digital prototype. This is a parody company called Catflix built in Figma. Now that we've covered an overview of prototyping, let's cover some tools that you can use to create digital prototypes. For more basic prototypes, there's Figma, Sketch, InVision, Adobe XD, and Balsamiq. We personally recommend Figma for prototyping. It offers the most features and dynamic interactions. For more advanced prototypes with more interactions and transitions, there's Protopie, Axure, and many more. Be sure the tool you use allows you to send a link of your prototype to your participants so you can conduct remote and unmoderated usability tests. All of the tools we listed have this ability. Also, always use the software that allows you to create a prototype in the least amount of time and still get the results you are hoping for. Usually this means you use the prototyping software that you feel the most comfortable using. Well, that's it for this lesson on prototyping and usability testing. To recap, usability testing is the evaluation of a product or service by testing it with representative users. We talked through the 6 reasons to conduct usability testing, which are to learn what extent your product or service truly helps users, to understand your users' goals and motivations, to diagnose issues with your interface, to learn how satisfied users are with your product or service, to truly understand what matters to users, and to gain clarity on how to make the most functional designs. Best of all, Your participants are co-creators of the design, literally telling you exactly what they need. Then we cover prototypes. A prototype is an early sample, model, or release of a product built to test a concept. There are 3 basic categories of prototyping in UX. First, HTML/coded prototypes, but don't worry about these. Second, paper prototypes. These are sketched versions of the website, feature, or product that you're creating. They're made up of multiple sketches that are strung together either by a software program or by you during a usability test. And finally, we talked about digital prototypes, which we recommend during this stage of the process. These have both the interactions and appearance of the intended design. They're created using software that links together wireframes and mockups. And finally, when choosing what software to prototype with, choose the one that allows you to create a prototype in the least amount of time and still get the results you were hoping for. Thanks for sticking with us. We'll see you in the next one.
Hey, what's up, Kick-Ass fam? In this video, we'll talk about the final stage of the UX process, visual design and handoff. This is the stage of the UX process where your designs truly come to life. And hopefully, not like Frankenstein. In this phase, you make your designs pixel perfect by finalizing typography, colors, shadows, layout, iconography, illustrations, and UX writing. You'll also ensure that your designs are visually accessible. And for some projects, if you have the time and more importantly, still have questions about your solution, you'll also conduct a final round of usability testing. Once your designs are finalized, then you will start handing off your designs to developers. That's it, it's pretty simple. It's almost like baking a cake. If the other 3 phases of the UX process were gathering the ingredients, mixing, baking, and assembling the cake, then this phase is adding the frosting and other decorations to make it look amazing. If you're currently not comfortable with designing high-fidelity UI, then here is what we recommend. First, get comfortable with the 8-point grid system. It will change the way you look at designing. Once you're up to speed on the 8-point grid system, go to your favorite website and apps that you believe that are the most beautiful and have the best user experience. Take screenshots of multiple screens on each site and paste those into Figma. From there, use the screenshots like templates or stencils. Try to recreate the screens exactly in Figma. Notice the spacing between elements and the color choices. Do your best to absorb everything. Then, when you've done that enough, try to recreate those same screens without using the screenshots as a stencil. Then keep repeating over and over and over. Sooner or later, if you keep doing this, you'll be able to design UI like a pro. Once you're confident with UI design, the next thing to master will be design systems. These enable you to create consistent, harmonious designs. All of the companies you can think of rely on design systems to make their digital product look excellent, while also being highly usable. Creating your own design system will take your design approach to the next level and challenge you to think about your designs as a system. While it can be slower to set everything up, it'll make your life so much easier in the future when you're building new designs, or if you want to change anything. If you ever need to change something in your designs, you will change it in one place and it will update across all your screens. This will save you a ton of time and headaches in the long run. One last thing, we included a list of resources below this video to help you better understand and learn about this entire phase of the UX process.
Hells to the yes. If you followed along, then you just completed our free UX course. This is cause for celebration. By completing this course, you've put in actual time to learning the UX fundamentals. That's the first step on the path to getting into UX. We are so excited to see what you do with your newly gained skills and knowledge. At this point, the main question to ask yourself is, do I want to continue on my UX journey? If you answered no to that question, then we wish you the best of luck. We'll always be here if you change your mind. If you answered yes, then it's up to you to figure out to what extent you want to pursue UX. Do you just want to add UX to your skill set, but not transition to UX? Or do you want to transition and become a UX designer? There are many paths you can take for either option. You can attend a university program, go through a bootcamp, teach yourself, or you can join one of our programs. Each path has its pros and cons. Some people might do better in university programs, some might do better in bootcamps, and others might do better on their own. It's really up to you and your learning style. We wrote an article about each of the 4 paths of getting into UX that you can read on our website. The link is in the description. If you are interested in joining us, we have 2 programs. First is UX Intensive, which is meant for folks who want to add UX to their skill set, but not necessarily transition. It's also for folks who aren't quite sure if UX is for them. Our flagship program, uxui Expert, is intended for graphic, web, UI, and other types of designers who want to fully transition to UX. If that sounds like you, we'd love to have you join us. Regardless, whatever path you choose, we're psyched that we got to be part of your UX journey. Congratulations again. We truly hope you enjoyed our free UX course.